Morning, fish keepers. Cam here from the fish room. We've got John with us as we do on a Friday. Make the Friday. Let's do coffee.
Let's do coffee.
All right. We have ourselves a couple of fantastic guests sitting, waiting for us to bring them up on screen. So we'll push some buttons. We'll make some magic happen.
Boom, boom, boom.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Jen and Nora. How are you doing?
Hi, we're great. Thank you so much for having us on.
Thank you for coming on with us. Much appreciated. Very cool. So, first of all, can you please give us a little bit of an introduction to who you both are and what you do when it comes to fish keeping?
Yeah, absolutely. Nora, do you want to kind of start out?
Sure. So I'm going to apologize. I'm fighting COVID right now, so if I sound kind of funny. But it's good to be here because sitting in your house all by yourself, not doing anything. This is great. So I'm a fish veterinarian. I grew up keeping fish, and I actually was really into the fish disease stuff. Even when I had them, most of the time, like, you get a sick fish and you're like, oh, this sucks. But I was very into figuring out what was going on and how to treat them, and what all the different diseases that aquarium fish could get were. And I ultimately decided to go to vet school after spending some time volunteering at New England Aquarium with Scott Dowd, who Jen will probably talk about as the person that connected us. And went to vet school. There's a lot of horses, cats, dogs, and cows in vet school, but I was very, very interested and committed to becoming a fish veterinarian. And so I finished vet school in 2016, and I went and worked for Indian tribes in Western Washington in the United States, doing veterinary services for them for their fish hatcheries. And then last year I've moved jobs and I work at a veterinary diagnostic lab now, where people send us fish for disease testing. And so I've been working on a project with Jen, and we have a website that we started, Fish Keep and Chill, that we made to try to give people better advice, because it seems like there's a lot of misinformation in the hobby, and we both are like, we love aquariums, and so that's kind of our current mission. But Jen also has probably a more interesting story than me.
Well, I don't know. I thought about being a vet, but I didn't know you could have just been a fish vet. So that would have been a good tip. Regardless, I found my way into the fish world. You probably wouldn't, I don't think you guys would know this show over in New Zealand, but I grew up watching this show called Danger Bay. It was on TV, and I'd run from school at 7 and I'd watch the show. And it was about this family, and the dad was the vet at the Vancouver Aquarium, and they had to do all these rescue missions and all this stuff. And I love the show. So this was like an absolutely formative thing for me. And it was actually filmed at the Vancouver Aquarium. So that just kind of set into my little mind that, that is what I want to do. I want to grow up and I want to work at the Vancouver Aquarium. And that's exactly what I did. So I started keeping fish just in my parents', in our household basement. And I ended up with, I think, sort of 4 tanks, which is a lot, when you're like 10, 11, 12. I wrote my first letter into Aquarium Fish magazine at age 13 to Ginny Eckstein, and she wrote back to me personally, which was like another one of those things where it just set you on that path and made you, this is great. I feel really special. Somebody's encouraging me and giving me that confidence to go ahead with it. So I ended up going to college for aquaculture technology at Sir Sanford Fleming College in Peterborough, Ontario. And from there, it was just kind of incredible. There was a job posted at the Vancouver Aquarium. I knew it was my job. I just had to go out there and show them. So I figured, okay, well, I'll go out to Vancouver for this interview. If I don't get the job, I'll volunteer until I do. And that was it. Went out to Vancouver from Ontario, kind of 5-hour flight, big flight for us here in Canada, kind of cross country. And I've never gone back other than just for holidays and whatever. But that was it. So I started working. I was a tropical freshwater aquarist there, looking after all the tropical freshwater fish galleries. So Amazon fish, Southeast Asian fish, Madagascar, Rift Lake cichlids, arapaima, electric eels. We had it all. So pretty incredible experience. I was there for 15 years. Became an expert on neotropical freshwater stingrays, which kind of became a real area of interest for me. And these days, I've gone back to being a hobbyist, and I'm raising different wild betta species. I also really like unique and cichlids. So yeah, lots of other things in between there, but yeah, that's kind of the basic story.
I think it's really cool that something as simple as a TV show has been enough to sort of fuel a passion, and then like little things like getting a letter back from someone for someone at a young age is also enough to just continue to go, this is it. And I don't think as humans we realize, it's totally getting off track, but how much an influence we can have on people for positive reinforcement and positive interactions from children at a young age, or adolescence, or whatever, how far that can make someone's dreams and passion drive throughout their lifetime. So that's fantastic. The other thing
fish keeping. Oh, I was just gonna say, fish keeping is something where it's almost like a craft or a trade where it's not necessarily something you're just gonna go buy a book and like start doing it and do great at. And so that's like, it's kind of like a cool part of it is to have like a connection or a mentor or just someone who's like encouraging you to do it and able to answer some questions. So that's something I haven't thought about before, but that's neat.
Yeah. I mean, I think with any hobby, when there's people that are more experienced, reaching out to the younger people that have just kind of started in the hobby, it can really make the difference between somebody continuing or somebody giving up. So it's really good to hear that.
Yeah, and I had the chance to actually tell her what that meant to me, which was really special. And it was because I had read an article that she and a co-author of hers wrote about breeding ancestors catfish. And I loved this article. I don't know what it was about it. Well, it was both of them had written it, which maybe sort of inspires what Nora and I are doing now. But just, it was just so good. And so I read that article again and again and again, and that's what inspired me to write in. And yeah, when I was I was invited down to do a talk about freshwater stingrays in Florida about 10 years ago. And one of my hosts, I mentioned to him, Chuck, about this, this letter. And he said, well, I know Ginny, let me get her on the phone. And he literally picked up the phone, handed it to me. And there I am talking to her saying, hey, you might not remember this, but, this had a huge impact on my life. And thank you so much. And it's still one of, my treasured possessions, this letter from her. So.
Wow. That's awesome. Yeah, that's a proper, that's a really cool moment, sort of thing.
Have you had the opportunity to potentially have that effect on somebody in your hobby or through your career or anything like that? Has anybody reached out and kind of given you that feeling?
Well, it's a great question, John. One of the things that was wonderful about my time at the Vancouver Aquarium was we had a lot of volunteers. We had a lot of interns, young people looking to get into the field and for that opportunity. We had part-time staff, and over my 15 plus years there, I interacted with many of them. And a lot of them had gone on to have careers. Like, they kind of started working with me back in the section, feeding bloodworms and siphoning tanks. And now they've got careers, in the industry. So I feel really good about that, helping people kind of get launched that way and just being a mentor in that sense.
That's a good example of, if you're in an area that has a public aquarium, and this is like not everywhere, right? But I mean, even some, there's even like public aquariums in some pretty small places, but I feel like I got pretty excited about it just from volunteering at New England Aquarium with Scott, and I mean, he was really, just such a great mentor and kind of like getting me on the right path. And I think that that's something like any aquarist, like to be able to do that is super cool.
Because it can be a hobby that is, like very independent, because it's really, at the end of the day, it's you and the fish inside, right? And so having a way to share that with others, through, this type of thing, or a blog, or mentoring people, or writing letters, or even just like a few months ago, Nora and our friend Ryan visited, and we had a very fishy weekend. It was awesome. So just so nice to share your hobby with people that get it, right? So
Definitely.
Yeah, I've always thought that fish keeping is going to be one of the few hobbies that if you don't want people to know that you do it, nobody in the world will know. Like, It's inside, it's in your own home. You can buy everything you want online, or go to one only fish shop where you might only have, one or two people that work there, and like you can keep this entire majestic fish room and nobody will know about it if you don't want people to know about it.
Well, if you're trying to keep it a secret, Cam, you're not doing a good job with doing a live stream. But
I'm probably struggling with that, but other people probably have that ability.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Okay, so how did the both of you meet, and sort of what drew you together?
Well, when I was volunteering at New England Aquarium in college, the guy I was working for, Scott Dowd, was the freshwater aquarist there for the freshwater gallery, and he would go on and on about how I needed to go on this Project Piaba trip, which is where they would go down, and then you get on a boat and basically go up the Rio Negro, and you get to see the commercial fishery, the ornamental fishery down there. But he was going on and on about how I had to go on it, and when I went on it, I was going to be roommates with Jen Reynolds from the Vancouver Aquarium. Like, he talked about this multiple times. And so, what do you know? I finally went on it. I actually went during my second year of vet school. I convinced them to let me leave for 2 weeks, and I missed a couple exams. I mean, it was. I don't know how I talked them into it, but I went down there, and then we were roommates on that trip. It was great.
Yep, that was probably my. Gosh, I was down there at least 4 times. So I think that was the second or no, it was the third trip. I think. Anyway,
because at that point Jen was learning Portuguese, and so she actually had gone on a secret special mission, further up the Rio Negro. And didn't meet us until a couple days into the trip. So that was yep.
Ryan and I had gone up to São Gabriel de Cachoeira to do some sort of reconnaissance on some of the ornamental fishery up there, which is way far, upriver past Barcelos in the Rio Negro. So yeah, that was pretty intense. But yeah, then we came back and met with the boat once they had gotten to Barcelos. So. But yeah, good on Scott. He got it right on that, us being roomies, and yeah, the rest is history. Although I will say one of the bonding experiences I most remember is doing a necropsy on a juvenile freshwater stingray with you.
Yep. Yep.
Night on the boat. Yeah.
So on the trip, and I should say, I mean, I think anyone that's interested pretty much can go on these trips. But on the trip, so Scott usually goes, and then Dr. Tim Miller Morgan is a veterinarian located in Oregon, but he always goes along. And then we had all sorts of water quality testing stuff, and then we were looking for parasites and doing necropsies, and it was and then the snorkeling is what's really the best part. Yeah.
Definitely a highlight. Yeah.
Cool. So you're definitely not the first people that have brought up Project Piaba. It comes up relatively often when we do our live streams. This is going off track just a little bit because you brought it up. What's it like doing that experience? First time round to multiple times? Does that change? Does your outlook change? What's that experience like being involved in that?
Yeah, well, I think as a hobbyist, if you've been a lifelong hobbyist and you've never seen the fish that you keep in your aquarium in the wild, I mean, there's just nothing like it. It's magical. Put your face on your water and see cardinal tetras right in front of you, swimming in their natural habitat, tea-stained water, and just under even something as simple as, hey, why are these fish so bright? You can be told, oh, it's because they're in this black water. But when you see, the effect, their bright colors underwater and how they blend in almost with it, it's incredible. So yeah, the first time experiencing that, I mean, obviously you kind of want more, and every trip after that, you still see something different, because an area like that, water levels change, different locations that can be accessed at some times and not other times. And it's always an adventure. I mean, things are constantly changing. I mean, trees fall down. You've got to, hacking the way through to get the canoe through, or, getting stuck on a sandbank in the middle of the night with the boat and they're trying to get off. Like there's just always something, happening. And it's also, I think, really important, if people can, to see how the fish are collected and handled, see the people who are making their living in a sustainable fashion, in this particular instance, on the harvest of primarily cardinal tetras, but other ornamental fish from the area with like really no, impact. The evidence, they've done the work on it to the wild populations. So, that's an amazing thing. And so to be there to see that, photo document it, understand it. And then a lot of the work being done that Nora can speak to more is about understanding how to keep the fish healthier through that supply chain, just so that everything's going as well as possible from start to finish for them.
Yeah, I thought that was the snorkeling and seeing the fish in the wild is incredible. And then seeing the people like who are actually catching them and where they're catching them. And then like all of the work that goes into getting them like all the way down the river to the airport to fly to another airport to then end up at your local fish store. That was mind-boggling to me. Fish are like very, very hardy creatures because that's a huge trip.
By the time you get them, if you're having problems, like they've done pretty well to even get to that point. And that Acara disco, the yellow flag you've got behind you, Nora, that's so in Barcelos, which is one of the main hubs, this town up the Rio Negro where the fish are collected and brought downriver from there. They have a festival every year. So the whole town, relies on the ornamental fish. They celebrate them. And so it's huge. It is, probably one of the biggest like parties and like carnival type of things like I've seen. And it's incredible as a freshwater fish geek lifelong to see like a 15-foot or larger like discus like being paraded through the stadium
with glowing eyes. They had the eyes were like light up.
Oh my god, like it's amazing. And so everybody's on one team, a Acara Disco or Cardinal, and it's kind of like competition. It's incredible. So yeah, it's such a fabric of life there.
Yeah, it must be. For us, it's a hobby, a lifelong hobby, and something that Garo's ever into. But for these people that live and breathe tropical fish, it's their lifeline, it's their culture, it's their everything. So it must be really interesting to see it from that different perspective.
Yeah.
Something that I don't normally do, I'll just give everyone that's watching a little bit of a teaser. In about a month's time, we're speaking to someone from Project Piaba. So it's kind of cool that you guys brought that up because I get to segue that a little bit. And not going to lie, I'm very excited about that because the amount of people that we've had on and spoken about it, it's going to be quite cool. So
it's cool. Yeah.
So yesterday before the stream, Jim was saying there's some questions that you potentially can't answer, Nora, with your professional position. So we're going to try and make that done well, if that makes sense. But we have had a question from the chat. If this does go sort of where you can't discuss, then just fire away and we'll move forward from that. So the question is, when we treat sick fish with the common meds available, how much of it is really just guesswork? How much harm can we be doing by shotgunning antibiotics and antifungals, dewormers, etc., etc.?
Oh, this is a good question. I love this question. And I know Jen will have something to say about this too. So I think it's one of the hardest things about being a hobbyist, and I've found myself in this situation, like, if I don't have access to a microscope or I don't have access to like, MS-222 to sedate fish, you kind of are in there looking at them and you're like, well, what do I think is wrong, right? And if you don't have the tools to properly, get the correct diagnosis, probably most of the time, like when we're looking in our fish tanks and thinking about what's going on, we're making an educated guess. And, sometimes it's a better guess than other times. Obviously, I think the more experience you have, the better of an idea you're going to have of something. But I'll also say, like, even like people who are really, really good. Like I'll look at something that I'm like, oh, this has to be it. And then I go and put it under a microscope and it's like, nope, totally wrong. I think that's a great question, because I think a lot of the times, you know, when fish are sick, you're making your best guess as to what's going on. And then, you know, the second part of the question about then kind of coming up with an approach of, okay, you know, this is what I think is wrong. How am I going to treat this? I think it raises a great point that I think it's really hard on fish. Like sometimes like I'll like troll through and kind of look at, you know, like fish disease forums or things like that, just to see what people are up to. And it can be like amazing what fish have been treated with like prior to, you know, someone like posting something on a forum, or even like I've had people call me about stuff, you know, like they have a goldfish or, you know, something else that they've done like 100 treatments on, you know, before I've seen it. And I think it's pretty stressful on the fish. And I also think it can be hard to like assess like whether something worked if you're treating it with like 500 different things. So I think that one of the most important things when, you know, if you have sick fish, is sometimes to take like a more general approach, and instead of getting like super targeted in on thinking like, oh my gosh, this is the exact parasite that this thing has to be, is to like look at a bigger picture of like making sure that your water quality is perfect. And then like trying like more like low stakes, low risk things like salt and things like that, and then kind of like ramping up from there. Because putting a bunch of drugs in, I really don't think it always helps. But Jen, I'm sure you probably have something to comment on about this.
Yeah, well, I mean, it kind of almost, you know, really goes back to the core of like why we're doing what we're doing with our website as well. I think that people can get too focused in on even, you know, arguing. If you do go in and look at some of the groups about, oh, it's this, no, it's that, you should do that. Like, and the idea that you're going to get to a correct diagnosis that you can never confirm, as Nora said, you know, if anybody should be able to look at a fish and guess what it has and get it right, it should be a fish vet. And she's just said, you know, you can't do that, right? Because it's just, you know, the time spent on, trying to argue between like if it's this or it's that, I think ultimately doesn't do you a lot of good. And we're trying to sort of help people learn a way to think about and to approach the problems rather than be, you know, really prescriptive with what to do. I mean, certainly in some circumstances there are things you can advise, you know, directly on how to dose salt and things like that. But yeah, one of the harms that can come from, you know, just adding all that stuff in, aside from the stress on the fish and the pieces that Nora mentioned, is you could be putting effort into dosing those medications and be missing, you know, what's actually going on, or missing the effort to address the root cause. And so, you know, when I worked at the Vancouver Aquarium, we had, you know, massive water system, and I wrote about this, you know, on our site about like the difference. There's an article there about the difference between like working in a public aquarium and at home, and which things are kind of better, which things are worse. And, you know, dealing with a huge shared water system, we would do tank checks every single day in the morning, and you've got to catch problems early. So I think this is one of the things, like I even recommend, you know, to home aquarists, like do, you know, a tank check similar to how, you know, you do in the public aquarium. Like you go in, you look, you're checking all the fish you want to see, like, is there any, you know, spots on the fins? How's the behavior? Is there one fish that's hanging? You're going to see problems and be able to address them before you're at the point where you've got a huge outbreak of something or an extremely sick fish. So that's really the key part, because that buys you time to think about, well, what's off in the environment that led to this? Is it social stress? Is it overpopulated? Am I behind on my water changes? You know, is my water quality not the right match for this fish? So yeah, really going back to the root causes is so important. And not, I guess, focusing on what is the exact cause of this, thinking that you can figure it out, and looking for, I guess, more, you know, broad spectrum things. And that's where like we're extreme fans of using salt and dosing it properly, because that's something, you know, that Nora has said, and like with the references we've looked at and my personal experience, can deal with a lot of different problems pretty effectively. So yeah, it's tough. It's tough though when you don't have a microscope and you don't have, the ability to do diagnosis. And here in Canada, it's been like these sort of alternative methods or more like holistic methods have more or less been forced on us as Canadian aquarists, because in 2019, I believe it's Health Canada, they basically took like all those fish meds that you guys can get in the US, or I don't know what you've got overseas, but off the shelves. They said, sorry, we're not going to sell bottled antibiotics and all these things anymore. So you're basically stuck with like Melifix and salt, and maybe you can get a bit of copper if you're lucky. So you've got to be a lot more clever about keeping your fish healthy now.
Yeah, we here in New Zealand are in a pretty similar situation. I don't think it's quite as extreme as in Canada, but we don't have basically anything either. So I know where you're coming from. That.
So here's a kind of fun one, because I always get a kick out of this. When you go to the pet store and you look here in the U.S., one of the and I don't even remember what they call it, but one of the products that's available is it's erythromycin, which is an antibiotic, and it's for gram-positive bacterial infections. Well, the hilarious part is probably 90+% of the time when an aquarium fish has a bacterial infection, it's gram-negative. So erythromycin isn't even going to work on that. And I always feel really bad for people because, you'll see that they've gone and bought it, they're dosing their fish with it, but it's probably not doing anything. And so it's they've wasted their money. They aren't doing what they need to be doing to help their fish, right? Because they think that they're doing it. And it's just, it's really unfortunate. So it's also funny because even here in the US, where we still have some of the stuff, they don't even have the right drugs available to help people.
Yeah. Stephen's got a follow-up question to that. He'd also be curious if there's a good modern source for understanding basic diagnostics and treatment of the common ailments that we see in the fish supply chain.
I think the two things that I really like, that I think are really interesting, and then Jen, you should chime in too. The Florida Tropical Aquaculture Laboratory and Dr. Roy Yanong down there, that's actually where a ton of the ornamental fish for sale in the United States are farmed. And I had the opportunity to spend 9 weeks down there during vet school, and it was really cool. There's ponds full of Malawi cichlids, and it's just kind of whole ponds full of rosy barbs, and just it was really interesting. But because they're dealing with the source of a lot of these fish, they have made really, really excellent guides. Their guide about ick is excellent. They have a number of them. They also have really, really good, they call them, I think extension publications, about water quality. They have really, really wonderful explanations of water quality that I think are really helpful for people. And it include a lot of their guides include a lot of pictures and sort of descriptions. They're really nice. And then the other one that I just love is the NOGA fish disease textbook, which is just it's problem based. So it will be something it'll be focused on a specific problem. So ick, nitrite toxicity, stuff like that. And then it kind of walks through how to tell that you're having that problem, what the common signs of the problem would be, and then how to treat it. And I just think that those are two very, very high quality resources. And I think that they, anybody at any level, can get useful information out of them.
Cool.
Yeah, those would definitely be, because we're working closely together on the site, and both of us are looking at those resources regularly. We also add those references, at the bottom of our conversations in our articles, so people know, where we're getting our information from, so they can dive in deeper and see, what's the evidence, what are we basing this on, and find some good resources. So those are all any reference that you see on our site is, personally vetted by Nora on that. And yeah, the other, I think Roy, he's just written and published a book with one of his colleagues as well. And I believe, well, maybe that's something you could.
We need him to send us a free copy of that book.
But yeah, that's very recently come out. And I think it's meant to be, for more the average fish keeper to be able to get a grasp on some of the issues. So that could be a good one to look into as well.
I love that you reference stuff on your site. I think that's massive, and for websites that are in that sort of field, not just a general kind of information website. I think more and more referencing needs to happen, but it just doesn't seem to be the way that it works, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's also funny though, because I do see I saw something the other day that kind of cracked me up, where someone like was saying something and then referenced something that was the opposite of what they said. So that's that's funny too, because it's like, I guess you can always say like, oh, I read this, and this is where I learned this thing, and it might not be true. So
yeah, check the reference as well. Yeah,
you always have trust but verify.
We've got another question here. This is from Rebecca. Do you feel that the interest in fish pathology has decreased over the years? A lot of those good fish pathology for Aquarius books are now a few decades old.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting, because I have like some of the older books that I actually like collected when I was a kid.
Yeah, I've got some. Yeah.
Yeah. And Jen and I were kind of talking about this, that they haven't. Yeah, I mean, they're all like quite old, have not been rewritten recently. It would be interesting to see what that would look like today. I think in part, probably part of it is because I know of many newer fish pathology books, but I think that they're more like technically targeted for like a professional level. So for like veterinarians, like masters and PhDs, people working in fish health. So yeah, that's interesting. I would be interested if there was a demand for that, and maybe the person that asked that question should check out Roy's book that he published with Dr. Greg Lubart. Yeah, maybe that would like take care of that. But send us an email if you have ideas for a book like that, because it's something interesting to think about.
Rebecca's just said that Dr. Roy is brilliant, and she's talked to him a little bit, and he's got a new textbook out, so I think she might be all on that already by the sounds of things.
Excellent.
We've had another two questions that are almost very similar. So I'll ask one and then follow directly up with the next one. Which of those alternative medicines are not even worth trying, or does it depend on the symptoms? Which is then followed up by Zen Ginger asking, how do you feel about products like Pimifix and Malefix?
So I think I'll start with the Pimifix Malefix thing and then move to the second question. I really don't think that those work. I think one of the hardest things with and like I guess as a licensed veterinarian, I'm very spoiled because I can write a prescription for anything I want to write a prescription for, and I have access to like FDA approved drugs, or like drugs that are manufactured in a way that what's in them, how much is in them, stuff like that. The really hard thing about any medications that you're getting like from the fish store or on the internet is even worse. You just don't know what's in them. You just can't be 100% sure. And so even if like theoretically the ingredient in the medication is correct, it's hard to know, like, is it at the correct concentration, etc. And so that's a pretty big challenge. But I will say, I don't think Pimifix or Malefix really have anything in them that is like proven to have efficacy against common pathogens, like in the aquarium trade. Now, someone can feel free to prove me wrong, but I just don't think that they work. But moving past that to sort of the next question, which is sort of how to approach, like you have like sick fish in your tank and how to approach treating them. I've been thinking about this a lot because, one of the hard things is like, unless I like look at the fish myself and examine them, it's really challenging. I mean, you just can never do a good job for someone and help them, get the right answer. But I do think that there's sort of this, and I have to credit Jen because I think she's gotten me thinking on this track that there is sort of like a general approach to like a common presentation. And so like one thing that we talked a little bit about is like white spots on fish. So if your fish have white spots on them, what is the most likely thing going on? Well, it's probably an ectoparasite of some kind. Could also be like a water mold, like Saprolegnia. Maybe it's a bacterial infection, but like we're probably sitting, somewhere there. And so then thinking about like of the most common causes of that, how do we treat that? And that's where I know that we keep talking about salt, but that's kind of what got our salt article going, is that like if you're looking at your fish and it's got white stuff on it, that is a great place to start. And then kind of like see what happens from there. And I've been thinking about that to try to like spur like a couple other articles. Other things people talk a lot about are like, columnaris. People get really excited about columnaris. And also like, fin rot is something, which what is fin rot? But those kinds of things. But I think a really important thing is to like end up with like a general category and then kind of identify like the most likely cause of that and then try to come up with a treatment for that. I think that kind of answered that second question. I don't know if you want to chime in, Jen.
Yeah. Definitely thinking about this sort of category of what you're dealing with and what's available to you to deal with it and why you might have gotten in that situation. Because, I can tell you just from, years of experience at the aquarium, fish don't really get sick randomly a lot of the time. Like we were saying earlier, they're pretty hardy creatures ultimately. But of course, something I always thought about working at the aquarium is I compared it to being a Piscean nurse, because literally everything is on life support at all times. So it is, it's just so much easier than with any other type of animal to have an environmental issue coming up, right? Yeah. I mean, you're managing the water in which, they're swimming and where they're getting oxygen from, like, really it's this whole system. So you've got to look at that. And as soon as we've got, fish that are all, crowded together, it absolutely adds stress. Talking to someone, online recently, they had a fish with white spots. The fish, wasn't healing up well. We're kind of going through like some ideas on that. And the conversation that never happened until I sort of asked the question, I was like, well, where is this fish on the social hierarchy? Is this fish being beat up? Is it having some chronic stress of some kind? Why is this the only one in your tank that's got these white spots? And the answer was, oh yes, this guy gets picked on all the time. And so, chronic stress right there, and that's what led to that, even though the other fish actually stayed healthy in this person's aquarium. And so, we actually talked about, okay, well, once you get through this, what can you do to reduce that? Can you add some hiding spots? Can you even just cut up some PVC pipes so there's somewhere, for this fish to hide? And be aware that, if this fish dies, there's probably going to be another fish that's then going to be at the bottom of the pecking order, at least when it comes to cichlids, particularly. But really thinking about, the behavioral aspect, the husbandry aspects, the environmental parameters. And that's the interplay, that we always had, at the aquarium between our veterinary department and the aquarist it is that art and science, right? And that blend. And that's what I really love about working with Nora, is that we both, bring like each side of that to our conversations and to our suggestions and to how we're thinking about problems and how to help people.
Cool. I've had another question. Do Jen and Nora have any recommendations for veterinary nurses? I butchered that word. Wanting to get into aquatic medicine in New Zealand.
Wait, I know one fish vet in New Zealand. He does salmon. I know several fish vets in Australia. And the reason I'm going with that is because I would encourage you to ask them, because they would have a better idea of like what opportunities there are for veterinary nurses, or like we call them vet techs here in the US. But it's funny, everyone I think wants to get it changed to nurses because it's I think it like better captures what the work is that you guys are doing. I would encourage you to check out, there is the World Aquatic Veterinary Medical Association. So it's wavma.org is their website. And they are an international association for aquatic veterinary medicine, where like a veterinary nurse would be able to join that. And I think there's a directory where you'd be able to see, like other professionals in New Zealand, and maybe also like training programs that are available. And it also might be worth checking out the American Association of Fish Vets has a membership for veterinary nurses, it's veterinary technicians as well. And they have some directories and stuff. And I would be curious what we have like several technicians that are members, and I would kind of be curious what they have to say. But that's super cool, and I think that the field actually needs more veterinary nurses. So that's cool that you're interested.
Mhm.
Do you have the name for the New Zealand fish vet?
I can't even remember. I'll have to look through my phone. If whoever said that, if you send us an email, I'll let you know, because it's one of two guys, and I always get their names confused. It's because they look really similar, and they were both from Canada, and one of them moved, and I never remember which one it is.
So commonly, I send people to our local vet because this is out of my pay grade. I can't help you with this sort of scenario. So if there is even one somewhere in New Zealand, which you're saying there is, that will be a fantastic resource to go, hey, give this person a email or a ring or whatever. You're going to get further with them than what you probably will with the vet down the road. So that's really cool that there is one here, and wicked awesome. What is the email address for the people that are watching so they can email you that?
Oh, yeah, it's fishkeepandchill@gmail.com.
Cool, there you go. All right, back to our questions. We kind of structured our questions to do one and then one, but we've been answering the questions together, so I'm not sure how this is going to work, but we will see how we go. Okay. Jen, can you describe your role and responsibilities as the senior biologist at the public aquarium that you're working at?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, incredible job. Stressful though too. So a lot of people who are aquarists definitely dream of having that kind of job, and yeah, like it is a huge responsibility, right? Because you've got multiple systems. So really, a good aquarist and a good public aquarist, and certainly what I was doing, day in and day out when I was there as a senior biologist, was really being a jack of all trades. You've got to understand water chemistry so that you can perform and interpret, water quality. Sometimes we had technicians that would help with that, but a lot of, in the early years, we had to do a lot of that ourselves as well. You've got to understand, fish behavior. So you're making selections on which types of fish are going to go together. You're obtaining fish, you're quarantining them, and then interacting with veterinary staff to make sure they're treated properly, before they go onto your main system. Designing the habitats. So depending on the size of the habitat, if it's a small aquarium, sometimes you would just be able to kind of change it up yourself, on a weekday, and do it with a home aquarium. But the larger ones, sometimes you're collaborating with, many levels of people, in the organization. So you might be collaborating with, carpentry staff to make sure there's a proper ladder for you to get up there and to deal with all your cleaning equipment and everything. Rock work specialists who are going in there and building in, all the aquascaping and the rocks there, and installing big pieces of glass and dealing with all that happening while you're still working with, your specimens in the back and the displays, and trying to always keep things nice. So like an average day, I guess, you go in, you do your tank check, which was, very, very important. And we always made sure to do that. So you go around, check all of your aquariums, obviously, for the obvious things like mortalities or big, issues that happened overnight. Sometimes they're really pleasant surprises. I'll never forget going in one morning, I'm looking at our black ghost knifefish display, which had, a beautiful, huge piece of drift with all kinds of nooks and crannies that I had just redone and put the adults back into this display. And I see a little tiny knifefish come out of the wood. It's just, what a thrill, right? Cam's face. Yeah, you get it, right? So it's just,
wow.
That's got to be one of the best feelings, right? It's everything that you've done. You've created this beautiful environment for them. All the nutrition's in place. Everything's great. And the fish are, essentially telling you, I'm happy here, I'm good. And when they're recruiting in the exhibit like that, and just sort of slowly adding to the population, it feels really good. Yeah, so that, and you've got to make sure everything's spotless. So you've got to be a pro algae battler. I never really appreciated algae very much until more recently when I'm doing my green water culture for my Daphnia. Now I have a new appreciation for it. But until then, it is the aquarius foe in a public aquarium. So things have got to be spotless, and you've got to know how to seal that and clean it with big, sticks and razors and all kinds of stuff without scratching the glass. Because if you scratch it once, you're the one that's going to be cleaning it for the next 10 years. The green algae that gets stuck at the bottom, right? So, because replacing glass is definitely, you know, a huge process and doesn't happen very often. Yeah, and then, you know, preparing food. Sometimes, you know, cleaning. Sometimes we'd have to go dive and clean. Then you're preparing food, thawing out different seafood, making gel diets. You know, ordering and dealing with flakes. Maybe there's medicated food involved, all kinds of frozen food, some live food cultures for certain fish. Yeah, you know, all that's happening. And as you're walking through the galleries, going from area to area, people are stopping and asking you questions. And that's like, it's a little hard when you're really busy. But it's also one of the pleasures, right? When somebody's noticed something or they have a question about the fish, like that's why we do it, you know, is to get the engagement and to have that interest. So especially mornings when they'd open early and have members come in, members would really notice the changes that you made or the new fish that were there. So that was really nice. Yeah, I mean, raising baby fish when you've got new, you know, fish that have spawned or, you know, little stingrays. That was one of my proudest things over 10 years at the aquarium was, you know, having raised up from small wild-caught individuals, tiger stingrays, and having them breed in our exhibit and being able to raise babies and ship them to other institutions. So that was, you know, it's a 10-year project. And so, you know, throughout all those daily tasks that you do, and I'm sure I've forgotten some of them because they're kind of endless, like water changes, dealing with systems, valves, pumps, like all this stuff. Over a longer term, all those things, when you're really attentive and you just like consistently show up and do all that the best you can get results, whether it's, you know, a little baby ghost, black ghost knifefish, or whether it's, you know, breeding tiger stingrays. You know, there's rewards.
The tiger stingrays was something. The tiger stingrays was something I wanted to talk about. Obviously, when you were working at the public aquarium, breeding the freshwater stingrays was something that you achieved. And how did you fit that into your daily role? Because obviously that must be quite a time-consuming project on its own, let alone the daily requirements of running the aquarium. So how did that go?
Yeah. It's you know, it's sort of baked into, you know, what I just described, but there are some sort of extra effort things that go in. And I wrote about that actually in Amazonas more years ago than I care to consider, but several years plus about the tiger stingrays specifically, because I had, you know, all the photos and everything. But one of the differences with being an aquarist and getting the animals, you know, to the stage where they could do that was even just acclimating wild-caught individuals when they come in. And so oftentimes, especially with freshwater stingrays, and especially with, you know, pickier, more challenging species like a tiger stingray, they can be very skinny and they can refuse a lot of food. And so a lot of time, you know, observing, putting in, you know, live foods, counting like literally how many shrimp did I put in, how many are left the next day, like is this animal eating for waste, like trying to figure that out because you're not there, you know, overnight all the time, especially with stingrays. They're usually more active, you know, at night, you know, before they sort of adjust into captivity, although they're always active at night, I will say that. Yeah, and so with the tiger stingrays, you know, there's a real process of, okay, I've learned this tiger stingray, she eats live goldfish, like that's it. So but she was kind of weak and little. So I would literally take, you know, these goldfish and forceps and stick it under the disc and she'd eat it. So I'm like, okay, she's eating something. Great. So that I'd keep doing that. And then I would start to, this is maybe not like animal welfare approved, but we got there eventually, is like, you know, just kill the goldfish very quickly, but they still, you know, have some electrical activity going on because that's what stingrays are very tuned into, and then feed them, right? And then it was, okay, now she's eating like very freshly killed goldfish, and now I'm going to kill it and leave it there for like an hour in the fridge, and now feed it. And then now it's a frozen freshly killed goldfish, right? So now this animal is eating frozen fish. Okay, no more live fish, like that's it. And then from there, we start to diversify. So it's like, okay, I got to get her onto eating frozen smelt. And this is, you know, one of the staple diets that we have, because you can't, to provide the volume of food that these animals need, they've got to get onto, you know, frozen, commonly available food that we have.
Something more sustainable.
Yeah, feed them blackworms for 10 years and get a breeding tiger stingray. It's just not going to work. So, then I would take a little piece of frozen smelt and I would stuff it inside the goldfish and then feed the goldfish. Wow, this little stingray smelt piece comes out the spiracle. Like, really? Wow. Okay. So I cut the piece smaller and smaller until, okay, it's accepted. And then from there, and then eventually she's eating smelt. And then eventually she's eating frozen shrimp, and eventually, clams, and eventually gel dye. Like, this is over years, right? And so doing that with each of them that came in until the point where your animals are eating enough of the food that you have available that's, nutritionally diverse and balanced, that they can get to the point to reproduce, right? And it takes a long time for them to grow to that, almost half a meter disc width that it takes before they usually would start reproducing. I had a little guidance from the Shed Aquarium. They were the first ones that I know of in North America to have bred the tiger stingrays. And I think we were sort of, just after that. And so, it's, and so that is, the thing where it's like, I don't want to be rushed away from taking care of this tiger stingray right now because, I got to clean the algae too. And it was always like, there's sort of a constant tension. And obviously it's really fun to do everything that I just described, right? Like, that's way more fun than going and scrubbing algae.
The daily stuff,
so it's just always doing that balance. And you do stay overtime, you stay late, so you're like, I just want to do a little bit more, or I just want to make sure I take care of this fish or babies at the end of the day. So it's very much passionate.
A labor of love, definitely.
Cool. I've had lots that's come out of it, and so I'm going to try and keep it to 3 key points that I want to know about the most from that. You've mentioned gel diets before. Is there a specific gel diet? Is it one that you guys made up yourself, or a commercial one that you found more effective?
At the aquarium, we used a powdered one. So we used to order from Missouri, and that was just one that we could get bulk. And they had different types available that worked, for a lot of different fish in our collection. So we'd order, I can't remember now. It's been a few years, but different ones, mix that up. And we felt it was important to have fish on gel diet, not as their staple diet, but to provide, make sure if there's any, nutrients that they're missing, like we're just providing a rounded diet that way. But also in the case that we would need to medicate them for anything, this would allow us to do that much more easily.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of gel diets and promote that as much as I possibly can for those reasons that you've just said. As also found the ingredients seem to be a little bit better often with them than dry prepared stuff.
Yeah, they have different protein sources, I've noticed. Like, I was looking at like Rapashi, and it was kind of nice because I got on a big black soldier fly larvae kick. I don't know that it really was like quite as good as I thought it was, but I was into it, and I liked that you could like pick more so than with. I feel like with the when you have to formulate like a flake or a pellet, you have to have like a certain amount of like starches in there, and then like basically fish meal, it seems like. And it seems like the gel diets have a little bit more variety.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, 100%. My other 2 questions. One is purely for my own curiosity. When you go through the morning procedure and going through your checks for your fish, was there like a checklist you'd run through everything, or was it just over time, you're going for this to this to this to this to every aquarium that you're looking after?
That's great point, Kim. Yes, when you start out, there is a checklist that's given to you, and by the time that you've been there several years and you're sort of fully invested, like, you're really not using the checklist. But when I went and worked with an aquarium in Brazil, I realized, okay, they actually need to be doing these tank checks because they're missing stuff that could be dealt with. And this is just such a simple intervention. So I did go through and okay, here's what we've got to do. And I mean, it's the basics. And these are the things where when you're experienced, like, you guys know, if you walk into your fish room, you can tell if there's a different noise. Hey, like,
there's a vibe.
There's something different, right? And and you start investigating and you figure it out. Oh, an airline popped off and it's making a little fine noise, or oh, that actually, that valve was stuck in it, or I didn't turn it back on, that, So those types of things. Also, they told us this in aquaculture college, and they were right. You do, and you guys, well understand this. You develop a fish sense where you can just look at the aquarium and you just know. And if you're doing that every morning, you can just tell. However, like the list that we would go through, check, is the water flowing? It's basic, simple thing. But even something, if people have internal canister filters in their aquarium, it's entirely possible somebody could miss for days or weeks that their internal canister filter is not operating, right? And that's why I don't always recommend those right away for beginners. Or it's actually good to have the algae growing on it so you can see, right? Yeah, so is the water flowing through the system? One, if there's an air line in the tank, is the air running? Two, right? Then three, what kind of cleaning do you have to do? Like, because you've got to prioritize your day that way. And then, are there any dead fish? Are there any fish that are acting strange? Is there any sign of disease on any of the fish? And then you get to look for babies after that.
And you don't have to spend that much time looking. Like I think about this is more with like when I would look in a raceway with like large salmon populations. But like if I sat there and looked for like 30 seconds, like I could see, are they flashing? Like are they moving well?
That's a great one. Are they flashing? Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, you really like. It's not like you have to spend hours staring in the tank. I think you raised a great point that if you just every morning you look in your tank for 1 minute and you do that every single day, it's better than like sporadically, spending like 2 hours looking at it, but then, not looking closely for another week. I think that's a really good point.
So for those that are watching that don't know what flashing is, can you explain that, please?
Yeah. So flashing is like basically like when fish are trying to itch. And so they'll like flick themselves against the bottom or against like a decoration or against the side of the tank. And what you see is like when they turn over, the iridescence on their scales like basically flashes. And it's a really common sign of external parasites. So things like ick is like a really classic thing that causes flashing. Although other things cause flashing too. Yeah, and I mean, the good news is I would also argue flashing is like one of the most treatable problems.
Yeah.
If you see flashing, start with salt.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's almost like, and that's a good reminder because it's almost so basic to me. Like, yeah, it's like, okay, flashing. Like, all right, I know we got some sort of external parasite. We're just going to start dealing with that. So that's like a pretty straightforward one. But, other signs when I say, oh, look at the fish and make sure there's something wrong. Like, okay, if I actually break that down, are their gills flared out? Are they respiring more heavily than they usually do? Are they hanging, by the surface? Are they positioned properly in the water column, or are they, losing equilibrium a bit or swimming a little bit funny? All these types of things.
With flashing, do you think that sometimes that could just be that the fish is itchy and they have something to scratch? So that is something that I've read more than once on random internet forums and Facebook, that my fish is flashing and people coming through with it could just be have an itchy spot and it's just trying to scratch.
I mean, it could be like a bunch of different things, honestly. And I've seen cases where, and I really don't know. And this was more for salmon, but I had one race of salmon that would always be flashing. I mean, I would look in there. And finally, I made like someone else come and look because I'm like, do we agree that these fish are flashing? And we agreed. And I kept looking at them. I kept doing like, a mucus scrape and a gill clip under the microscope. And I'm like, what is there? And I could never find anything. So I do think sometimes you will see fish just flashing. And I had an interesting example of this. I actually didn't tell Jen. I should have told you about this. I was like staring in the tank with I call them my jumbo jets, but I don't even know what they are anymore because of that whole Corydoris reclassification. I think they're like Haplosoma CW051 now, whatever. They're massive cories. And like one of them is like flashing. This is a couple weeks ago, and he's just like flat. And I was like, what the heck is going on? And so then I'm like watching really closely, like for the next week. I don't know what it was because they're fine. So I don't know if they just had like a really low parasite load. Maybe like something was stuck on his gill. But I think you're exactly right. It's a reaction to something, and it could be something totally benign. That's like sometimes you just get an itchy spot, and it also could be like they have parasites. They have like fungus. It can also be like environmental irritants. So if there's something in the water that's bothering them, but I guess what I would say again, I mean, like, I wish we were getting like a kickback from the salt companies.
I know.
But, even if it's not a parasite or, something that salt treats, it probably doesn't hurt to like throw some salt in there and just see if that helps. But it's weird. Sometimes fish just flash and you never figure out exactly why they were flashing.
Well, we had that. I was talking to you. It was about like 2 months ago.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, since I started keeping wild bettas, the thing you always hear is be careful. They get velvet. They get, Pycnogenium. Like, this is the big problem. So I've been on hyper aware, like, okay, if I'm going to have a problem, that's probably going to be what
she has a magnifying glass. She sits and looks at them with a magnifying glass.
That's the nice thing about it being a hobby now, is you get to do that with your spare time. But yeah, and one of them was flashing. And in fact, the tank's been set up for 6 months, no problem. And I was just like really worried about that, because it was consistent. It's one thing if they do it once, but it's like, okay, he keeps doing it. That was it. It was for one day, and then it was gone. Done. No health problems, nothing. They're breeding. It's all good. So, it is possible. But Nora, your point about a low parasite load is a good one, because that kind of goes back to what we're saying about environmental conditions, in that, I don't think any fish is really, sterile. Like, you're not going to have anything in the tank. It's just like us too. Like, we're always exposed to something, but we're able to fight it off, like, for the most part, when, we're relatively healthy and we're not chronically stressed and all of that, until maybe you get exposed to too much of it or something.
Well, and even, zebra danios are used in medical research now. And even these zebrafish colonies, I mean, these guys, they're like very, careful. They have like quarantine biosecurity. I mean, they're serious business, and they still get infectious diseases in there, because that's exactly right. Like, the water is not clean and the fish is not sterile. So it's just, it's there.
Cool. So I've got one more question for you, Jen, and it is absolutely about the knife fish. And then we've got a couple of questions from the chat. Was the knife fish spawning a one-off, or did that occur again? And if it did occur, or what were the measures you took to put this in place to make it happen and all that? I just want to know all of it.
Yeah. I wondered, I was like, okay, why did this happen? Because I had, we had these knife fish in a smaller display for, I think, a few years, like 3 or 4 years. And then I was upgrading them to a bigger display. Same water system, like just flow through main system. But what I had done was, while I was building the new display, I had taken them off behind the scenes in the back. So they were in, I guess they were 90-gallon tanks that we had. So significantly smaller than what their display was. I had all the PVC pipes and stuff, but it was just temporary holding. So, probably it had to be a dozen or more, like fairly large knife fish. No, you can't see on this here, but yeah, pretty big mature knife fish. And they were back there. I was feeding them pretty heavily there, because I could see them eating, and it was kind of fun. Because normally when you're in the aquarium environment, you're just, from the back, you're looking down on your tank, so it's harder to see everything eat. You can't just run all the way out to the galleries all the time. Sometimes you have to, but anyway, it's kind of fun watching them eat. So I think I was probably ending up feeding them more. And because it was a closed aquarium system versus being on our flow-through system, where there's always a little bit of Vancouver City dechlorinated water coming in, which is like very, very low conductivity water. Like, it's like 30 TDS, like it's extremely clean, very nice water. So we do softwater fish here. So the conductivity, like this is, I sort of thought back in time, like what might have triggered this. So they would have been in higher conductivity water with some kind of waste building up. Sure, as water changing it, but it's not going to be as good as on the main system, and getting a lot of heavy feeding. And so put them back in the new display, there were so many different areas to hide. So surely, it was helpful too with them finding areas, to spawn and do all that. But I actually think it's possible that the trigger was going from, higher conductivity water that they were in for a while, getting heavily fed, and then going into this lower conductivity system with lots of spawning areas and lots of room, floating plants, for little guys to hide and stuff. So the right habitat, and I think it was like a change in the water conditions. And so but I did see other recruits like come out over the years. It wasn't a lot, but there were at least a half dozen. And they are freaking adorable. Oh my goodness. If you've never seen like a 3/4 inch long, or sorry, you guys are metric too. Nora's the only American. If you've never seen like a 2-centimeter knife fish, oh my gosh, they're amazing. But there was somebody actually that I knew who was at one of the universities on Vancouver Island here, who was actually breeding them purposefully. And he had a whole system there, and somewhat similar. So for a lot of these Amazonian fish, it's like mimicking that change, into the sort of rainy season, right, where the water conductivity is gonna drop, and you're gonna have a lot of food available to you.
Yeah, I have recently read on a random Facebook page that I can't find for the life of me now. Someone, I think, over in Europe, purposely breeding knife fish as well in I want to say home aquarium, but decent sized home aquariums, and ticking a few boxes and beginning to repeat that process, which I think is quite exciting and quite amazing as well. So that's really cool. Cool. All right, so we've got a couple of questions from the chat. In the USA, do aquatic biology degrees offer husbandry? In the UK, husbandry isn't an aquatic biology degree. People would have to choose a general animal husbandry degree.
I'll answer for the US, but then I think Jen should talk about her training. So in the United States, there are training programs that you can do that focus on basically aquatic husbandry. One that I'm thinking of, we mentioned him earlier, but Dr. Tim Miller-Morgan is located in Oregon, and I cannot. It's like the Oregon Coast Community College or something like that. He actually helped to develop a whole aquarium sciences program that trains people essentially to be public aquarists, and it's exceptional. I got to go there and see the facilities, and there's people who have come out of that program that have ended up at public aquariums across the U.S. And I think it's just it's incredible. I think if I'd known about it when I was in high school, I might have got really excited about that.
Well, they didn't I don't think we even had it back then, but same, it's
new.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the one other thing I was going to say, and this is going to probably feed into what Jen is going to say, there are training programs, so associates and bachelor's degrees in the United States for specifically, I'm thinking about aquaculture, but this is very, very relevant to, really any sector of raising aquatic animals. And so there's a number of programs where you can earn a degree in aquaculture, and that would be essentially a fish husbandry training. And Jen pretty much did this. So
yeah. So for me it was 24 years ago, 25 years ago. Oh my gosh, that feels really weird to say, but it's the truth. But yeah, so what I was able to find in Canada, so knowing that my goal was to go to Vancouver Aquarium, my dad actually helped me. When we were in high school, we phoned the aquarium from Ontario, and we said, hey, I don't even know who it was we spoke to. I wish I could thank them now, but what is the right type of education if I want to get a job there, if I want to work looking after fish. And they actually said that, just getting, a bachelor's degree in marine biology was not actually the best way to go, because it didn't give you the hands-on husbandry experience. Sure, you might have a lot of conceptual knowledge, and there's a lot of, obviously, situations in which that's a great degree to have. But specifically for looking after the fish there, that wasn't necessarily what they would look for. And so they recommended that the curator at the time who was there had done this aquaculture technology program, a 2-year program at this Sir Sanford Fleming. And so, I thought, what, if the curator did it and he's hired, good enough for me. So I went and did that. And of course, it was focused on aquaculture because that's where the majority of the jobs were. But when you do, intensive aquaculture work on learning how to run systems with salmon, doing all the stuff with salmon and raceways, dealing with, using MS-222, they even taught you, skin scrapes and things like that. And how to deal with all the different types of filters, drum filters, bead filters, sand filters, all this stuff. Once you've done it at that level, and they also had a tilapia hatchery on campus that was an actual functional business where graduates and students could go and work part-time. So I did that as well. Then honestly, walking into somewhere like the aquarium, things are much lower density. It's in many ways a walk in the park, at least in terms of, the intensiveness and the urgency around culture and systems. And so, yeah, that gave me a really solid foundation on that front. Of course, having been a hobbyist and having, an interest in and experience with dealing with closed systems, with, breeding my own cichlids and things like that, that was the other piece that was important. So I think anybody just benefits from having their own hobby as well. Also, the program, as in, they did have a course on ornamental fish, and so one of the teachers there, he was super passionate about that. So we actually got to have one of the class projects, and one of our own projects was pick a type of tropical fish species and reproduce them. And so blue rams was what I picked. Lovely fish, right? I still love
choice.
Yeah. And, we got to keep those in the classroom and monitor those. And so you just kind of get both sides of it there, like the smaller tanks and just dealing with different species and larger stuff.
So would you say working in a public aquarium is in many ways like a hybrid between the hobbyist and aquaculture?
Absolutely. Yeah, it absolutely is. And, the program that Nora mentioned, that Dr. Tim Miller-Morgan runs down there, that's an incredible program. And I think that gives people a lot of, there's always a steep learning curve when you go into a public aquarium environment from any of these other directions, because you're also dealing with a regulated, there are regulatory bodies like the American Zoo and Aquarium Association. We've got, PASA, the Canadian equivalent. And, there's different types of record keeping requirements, different types of how you acquire and, deaccession or dispose of fish to other institutions or whatever. There's quite a lot that you need to learn about that. And then, of course, just interacting with the public, right? Because end of the day, typically it's the displays that are driving the gate revenue. And so there's that balance between providing for the proper husbandry for the fish and making sure that the displays are appealing for people. And so, it's like you got the octopus tank, of course, from an aquarist perspective, the octopus wants somewhere to hide. We're going to give him a big old hiding spot. Well, not everybody loves that when it's yeah, sorry, you still can't see the octopus just hiding, right? Yeah. So how do you design something that balances, the needs of the animal, from an animal welfare perspective and from managing their stress and what they need, and meeting the needs of the public as to why they're coming there, so they can be educated about the animals and hopefully inspire, the lifelong love for fish that have brought me and Nora to where we are with it.
Yeah.
All right, John. I was going to bring up the next question we've got. Tom would like to hear your view on Corydoridine, I'm butchering that, and salt.
Oh, and a very appropriate profile picture, I just want to say. Yeah. So Jen and I have talked about this. I mean, well, Jen, why don't you talk about some of this? Because it's not just Corydoridine, right? You've treated a ton of salt sensitive fish with very high levels of salt.
Yeah. So, when, with this open system that I described having at the aquarium, you can imagine that if there is a problem going on with several fish in one exhibit, for one, it can be extremely difficult to catch them out. And so you may have to consider doing a system-wide treatment. Really salt's it. If you're going to do a system-wide treatment on that huge volume of water that's constantly recycling through, you can keep salinity levels in there. And so I would, for smaller systems, literally big bags of salt, use that. And for a bigger system, I would actually, it's a little bit nerve-wracking to think about, but nothing bad ever happened from it, hook up the line from our saltwater system, crank it on and balance. Okay, we got to get the system salinity up to 3 grams per liter. And I was monitoring, with our meters. And so I have experience treating our entire tropical freshwater system with up to 3 parts per thousand or 3 grams per liter of salt, measured on a salinity meter. And in that system, there were what used to be called Corydoridine stirbai. Are they I
think they're Haplosoma now. I think everything I like is Haplosoma, so they must be Haplosoma.
We should have studied in advance for this one, have some flashcards. So we had the stirbays in there, and I never had a problem with them, with that salt exposure. We had other catfish, we had loricarid catfishes. We had, trying to remember some of the other ones. Anyway, lots of catfish in the system. And I do not recall ever losing a fish from salt treatment at that level. And that's like just a really broad range of fish. Now, what I do remember happening was, so we also had an electric eel in that system. We also had these black ghost knifefish. These fish would just kind of sink to the bottom and stop eating, because it's almost as if that high level of conductivity from the salt kind of, for lack of, a more like eloquent term, like kind of short-circuited them. Like they couldn't really navigate properly and find their food. They never died. They just stayed like that until the salt dissipated out of the system, and then they're fine. So I've done that for, up like 5 to 7 days, sometimes at a time, to deal with some of the sort of ongoing like chronic, parasite issues that we would have in there. Epistalis was one that would come in that system a fair bit. And we did, skin scrapes and diagnose that. And that was the recommendation for treatment that we had from our vet there at the time.
So just clarifying that, Epistalis treating with salt, is that what you just said?
That's, yep, I did a lot of that. Yeah, and I knew that's what it was, because we actually had the vets to skin scrape it and the microscope, and that's what they recommended. And again, most often I would see that as a secondary thing. It's like, oh, this fish got a bit beat up, like some other fish attacked it and it got a bit of an open wound, and then this kind of came onto it. There were some other fish though that just seemed more prone to it, for whatever reason. Congo tetras, I was never able to keep a big display of Congo tetras, as beautiful as they are. They just seem to always get a small amount of it around their mouth. It didn't hurt them, but it was unsightly. So,
and Epistalis, that's one I've seen on also like bottom dwellers, or fish that are like less active swimming in the water columns. Like I'm thinking of like loricarids. I've seen them get Epistalis infestations, but it's definitely like a secondary thing. And usually, because like where I saw it was actually in like ponds full of them. And I've seen it on salmon as well. And it's really funny because if you pick up a fish that's swimming around, it's not going to have it. And then if you get one that was not doing so well, it's like sitting on the bottom, you'll see Epistalis. And then there's other related sessile ciliates like Vorticella, and things like that. But it's definitely like there has to be like a pretty high like debris level, or the fish have to kind of be like sitting on something that's sort of, I don't know if it's like growing it or what, but it's a total secondary thing.
Well, and that's what we had. We had to, in that main system, of course, because it's got to be displays. Like there's a lot of wood, a lot of driftwood, where there's like a soft layer that, sort of developing on the top that needs to be cleaned off, from time to time. And plant matter sort of dropping in the system, from in the Amazon gallery, we had all the plants there. That is the nature of the beast, in that scenario. And so, yeah, definitely, built up organic materials, and any kind of other chronic stress. There's things you can't control in the public aquarium. Like not everything's perfect. You try to make it, as perfect as you can. But ultimately, when that many fish are sharing water, it's not going to be the correct, exact, perfect water or temperature for all of them. So it's going to be like, for some, it's going to be perfect, and others, it's going to be a bit suboptimal.
So I just want to quickly talk about Epistalis for a minute or two, because you've triggered me and
We've triggered ourselves. It's okay.
Yeah.
So it's obviously, it's often misdiagnosed between ick and Epistalis. Rightly or wrongly, I believe there's a website that confuses people a lot more than what it doesn't. Can you please explain some of the very, very obvious visual differences between the two?
Yeah, so I think that the biggest thing that I think about when people because the classic thing you see is like someone looks in their tank and they have a fish that has white spots on it. Really, like, you're not going to know if it's Ichor epistalis unless you take a mucus scrape and you look at it under a microscope. Now, you can have a pretty strong suspicion if you've been looking at a lot of fish with white spots and then you check it and you see, I think that there are like some small differences. But the thing that I think that like the average hobbyist should be focusing upon when they're looking at their fish that has white spots and they're like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with it? did you recently introduce new fish to the tank? If you did, it is probably ick, because ick is like highly infectious. It's something that's going to like come in with new arrivals. And then the other thing that of course triggers ick can be like if there's like a sudden drop in water temperature, and they got like a cold shock. That's like another reason that they can get ick, right? But there's usually like some kind of like sort of precipitating event, right? That like brought in ick, or that like sort of like triggered it in the system. Epistylus is going to be something that you're more going to see like in an old established system. Maybe the fish has a wound on it from something else. I think just to like do like a little bit of a generalization, and not to say that, you know, this is definitively going to get it every time, but when you have like really nicely defined white spots all over the fish, you know, that have like just recently appeared and whatever, and a bunch of fish are breaking with it, that's like your classic ick, right? Like you put in an infected fish and then everybody in the tank starts getting it. Epistylus, I think, tends to be more of this like slow moldering thing where you like look one day and you're like, oh, it's got like this little kind of patch. Oh gosh, now it's bigger. Oh no, another one, you know, and it kind of like continues along. And so that's sort of like the things that I think, instead of people focusing on like whether the dots are like raised or flat or on the eye or on the tail or whatever, just think about like, did you do something to your tank that could have made them get ick? Or is this like an old established tank that maybe you haven't been doing enough water changes on? And do we have Epistylus going? And then kind of at the end of the day, I don't know that it matters so much, because if you do like 3 ppt salt in there and just kind of let it go, hopefully that should deal with both of them. Sometimes it might not deal with ick. But I think, but yeah, it's an interesting thing. People get really excited, and I never even, like, I laugh because like Jen showed me like some incredible arguments about ick versus Epistylus. It never would have crossed my mind to even like, you know, kind of conflate those two things together.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate, because it does get people again focused on, oh, is it this or is it that, when really they need to be looking at what's the context, you know, and that's what we always try to zoom out to. What's the context of what's happening, all the things that Nora mentioned. And end of the day, you know, ick is kind of an emergency in your tank. Like as soon as you see that, hopefully you're detecting it early if you've got good practices to observe your fish. Epistylus, when we would see that in our systems, like, okay, there it is again, like we'll deal with it, but it wasn't a panic, drop everything, deal with it, we got to decide, like, at all. It was just like a chronic sort of thing that, you know, you just need to deal with, you know. It's really unfortunate. And, you know, the idea that you could visually differentiate it just based on, you know, these certain factors, it just doesn't hold water, because, you know, many different fish species will have a different reaction to ectoparasites on their skin that may look a little bit different between them. And so there's just not, you know, some uniform thing.
Well, and even like, I'm just thinking about, you know, we had your friend's fish that you were sending me some pictures of, and I was like, oh yeah, you know, here I am. This is why I won't diagnose things over pictures for anyone, because I'm like, oh yeah, there's got to be columnaris. You know, it has these nice like skin lesions. You know, they're like patches. I thought they looked a little yellow in the picture, and then you actually took the fish, preserved them, sent them to our lab, and my boss looked at them because he's like a veterinary pathologist, and they had mycobacterium. So yeah, I mean, it is.
Yeah, and we just goes to show us. We were not expecting that at all. That wasn't even on our list of possibilities, right? So, yeah.
So just still on the NEP. People are misconception or conception of temperature changes the result of both of them. Raising temperature to speed up the ick cycle can then also make Epistylus more deadly. Is there truth in that conception?
So ick does, so it has a life cycle where, and this is actually kind of interesting, so maybe we'll get into this. It has a life cycle where it's like encysted, you know, let's say like, I don't know, in the gravel, and then it hatches, it swims off, and then penetrates into the fish's like gills and under the skin. And it's really incredible. Like when you look at it under the microscope, and you can see YouTube videos of this, it's like rolling around in there, like swimming around. I mean, it causes a lot of damage. And then of course this poor fish, you know, it has holes poked in all of its like protective layer from the outside. So it's getting like, you know, inundated with water and stuff. And it opens like avenues for like other things like bacteria. But you know, it's under the skin, and then it kind of goes under a developmental cycle in there, and then it basically like pops back out, swims around, and turns into this cyst. And so one of the hardest things about ick, and Jen talks about this really nicely in something we did on our website, you can't treat it at all stages. When it's like encysted, and then when it's under the skin of the fish, it's protected, so it's hard to kill it, and that's why, you know, you have to have like a certain length of the treatment, and the speed at which it progresses through its life cycle is dependent upon the water temperature. So you basically, and there's a nice chart on Dr. Reynolds. He has an extension publication, you know, that we mentioned earlier about ick. But there's a nice chart that walks through, like, at this water temperature, this is how many days it completes ick, or how many days it takes ick to complete its life cycle. And so that tells you like how long you have to treat it for, because you basically have to treat it long enough that it's gone through all of the stages that you can nuke it. So that is true, that if you were to increase the water temperature, it would go through the life cycle more quickly. I don't know that you have to do that. I mean, if you have like your effective, you know, dose of salt or copper or whatever you're using there, you know, it should work. As far as Epistylus, I have a feeling that what that has to do with is the fish's immune system. And what's so interesting about fish is that fish, so like mammals, okay, so like I just had COVID. I was getting a fever because, you know, your body induces a fever to basically like make the virus less able to replicate. Fish can't do that because they live at the temperature of the water that they're in. There's a really cool study for anyone that's interested about goldfish inducing fever in themselves by giving them the choice of being able to swim into different water temperatures when I don't remember what they infected them with. I think it might have been a virus. And they could choose like different chambers to swim into. And they actually would swim into the hotter chamber and sit there when they were infected because, you know, the virus couldn't replicate as well there. And for whatever reason, yeah, it's a really cool paper. But alternatively, and you have this with like a number of different viruses, like koi herpes virus is a great example, spring viremia of carp, both of these affect carp, and then one affects goldfish. You will see disease with it at certain temperatures, and fish can be infected with some of these viruses at other water temperatures and have no clinical signs and be perfectly fine. So what I suspect with Epistylus is that if you're jacking up the water temperature and it's too high and the fish are like, you know, stressful for the fish to be at that higher temperature, that might compromise the fish's immune system and it can't fight off the Epistylus as well. It also could be that the parasite likes the higher temperature, but that's something like, especially with fish, is to not just think about the, you know, the environment and the pathogen, but also like the fish's body and immune system itself, because they're so dependent upon water temperature, and then also like you know, the quality of the water around them and the hygiene and stuff like that to fight stuff off. So it's like fish immunity is really fascinating.
All right, and I've got one follow-up question, and we've got a whole lot of questions that have come through on the chat. You've both mentioned salt for both of these treatments. How does salt work when it comes to both ick and Epistylus?
So salt basically, so ick and Epistylus are like small single-celled organisms. And so they're like particularly susceptible to the osmotic disruption that salt causes. So like when you salt the water, they're going to have a harder time like keeping their own like single cell floating in this salty bath intact. You know, the fish can tolerate that a little bit more because the fish is like a bigger organism. They have like the gill chloride cells. They have the salt excretion system like through their urinary tract. So they kind of have a whole setup to be able to handle salt better than these really small organisms do. And that's why salt works on things like, so both of those are parasites. It can work on bacteria. And then it can also work on like, you know, like water mold. So like fungus. It's not fungus, but people like to call it that. And so that's sort of what it does. yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I mean, I could just add to that. My experience with using so much salt over the years, and I was saying to Nora, one of our recent conversations was, it still, even after all those years, it still kind of shocks me when I weigh out and measure, okay, like here's the amount of salt that I'm going to put in this tank. It's like, it's a lot, visually. And I think it's a little scary for people, especially if you're newer and you don't have the experience. Yeah, I've done this before. I've seen fish get through it. I'm not going to be hurting my fish right now. So, you can get the amount like calculated. We actually have, we're working on some more resources, but have some resources on our site to help people with that. And you can just add it slowly too, right? You can just dissolve the brine in, just add a bit, like over 12 hours even, like if that makes you more comfortable. The other thing that I used to use all the time, to the point I even wrote my name on it so nobody would steal it from me at the aquarium, was a low level salinity meter. Just a great tool. Like if you've got multiple tanks and you're going to be using this, just awesome. You can just dip it in, get a reading right away, because it's a little harder to get an accurate reading at those low levels, with something like a refractometer or what's commonly used for, saltwater aquariums. So
Yeah.
that's a great tool for the serious freshwater aquarists, is to have that low level salinity meter. Really commonly used.
Not that much on Amazon.
It's not that, yeah. And if you've got a pond, I mean, people are using that all the time. So.
I'm not going to lie, I've totally geeked out over that last 15 minutes worth of conversation, and thank you very much. And I'm sure that there'll be a lot of people that have just listened to that or listened to that following up later today that will have their mind opened and blown a little bit. So thank you very much for that. That was fantastic.
Yeah, and I really appreciate Nora. Like, I think she and I learn from each other all the time. There are things she just said on this call, I'm like, oh, I didn't know that, and I love that. And that's why we set up our conversations too, because we've got like this, back and forth, where we each just really enjoy learning from each other too.
And this is why we do it, to just share as much for everybody here. Yeah, cool.
Well, we've talked a lot about treating disease and sickness in fish, but one thing I want to ask before we kind of move forward is preventative treatments or preventative measures. For example, I'm receiving fish tomorrow that have been wild caught, and obviously they're going to go into a quarantine tank. But what would you recommend as a preventative measure?
I dive in and then let you take that one over?
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of medications and so on, I'm definitely going to defer to Nora. However, I am a huge fan of using UV in terms of a preventative thing. This is what I chose to do with the wild bettas that I've been working with. When I bring them in, they're in a small quarantine aquarium, just with an internal filter. Like, we have these things available to us now with UV, and this has the potential, if the unit's correctly sized, to stave off a lot of problems where now you're dealing with medication or dosing salt or this or that. And especially if you're somewhere where we don't have access to a lot of these things on the shelf, I really recommend that.
Okay. That's doable.
Yeah, so the UV thing is great, and I think it sort of like hones in on the main thing you're thinking about when you're bringing these new fish in, is like, what pathogens could they have. And so, like, if this was like a public aquarium, or like an aquaculture facility where it was like a specific species that you were bringing in, and then like the system you're introducing it to, I would actually get into like a whole risk assessment of like, okay, these are whatever, they like okay, koi. I'm worried that they have KHV. I'm worried that they have SVC. I'm worried that they have CEV. Every acronym one could come up with, but thinking about the specific pathogens that those fish could have, and then understanding the sort of like incubation period, or like the period during which you would expect to see signs. So one thing I'm thinking about is in the United States, there has recently been a koi herpes virus outbreak, unfortunately, and based on like imported fish, and it's been really interesting because there have been people who have been have purchased koi, from either someone who had like KHV at their facility and then notified them, or they've had an issue after they bought them. And so this is a great example of like quarantine is critical. Anytime you're getting new fish, you just have to keep them separate, and it's like so hard. I killed a bunch of fish with ick, putting a infected betta fish in with something. So I've it's hard. Yep, you got to do it. You got to quarantine, and so having them in a separate system. And then the interesting thing about KHV, which we kind of got into previously, is that if you hold the fish at like a certain temperature, you will never see that they were infected because they'll never show clinical signs of disease. Mm-hmm. So you have to make sure that you're like holding them at the correct temperature where, you get them and you put them at this, like, it's something like, I don't know, 68 to 77 degrees Fahrenheit, for them to be able to show clinical signs, of KHV, and you're observing them, during that time. But where I'm going to with all this is it can get like super, super specific. Another big thing I'm thinking about is like, I don't know if you guys have this there. You probably do. Grammies, get that megalocytovirus that's like a huge issue and kind of just like wipes them out. This has been an issue.
Is that what's commonly known as dwarf Grammy disease or something along those lines?
I think it might be. I'd have to check what I'd have to double check that that's what it is, but I think it might be because so like it's in Grammies, it's an iridovirus, and it just nukes them.
Yeah.
And so, that's something else I'm thinking of, but moving beyond, you do your quarantine and you can get super specific about it, but just to make it a little bit more general, let's say that you're not going to like get into like the top 5 diseases, this species and that, stick them in their own tank for like a month, maintain excellent hygiene, right? Constant water changes, UV filtration on it, like all of that is just going to help. If there's anything that they have, it's going to like prevent it from like, replicating in the water. Mm-hmm. And I really would say that that's sufficient. I think occasionally you might have something like really specific that you want to treat them for prior to introduction. And something I'm thinking about, like Jen and I went to a fish store up in Canada, and in addition to seeing very exciting live piranha feeding, we also saw some wild fish, that they like imported that we assume had like camelanus, which is a nematode, because the little worms were like sticking out of the vent. And I could see something where like if you have a certain species of like wild fish that always seem to have the same problem, that might be where you would like implement a treatment into the quarantine. But I will say that I hear about people doing a lot of like treatments with like medications during quarantine, and I think it can be really hard on the fish. And we sort of talked about this with like the cardinal tetras that we saw coming down the Rio Negro to Manaus and then like flying out, to like Florida and then going, to Madison, Wisconsin or whatever. And then you like hit them with copper, and copper is like a hepatotoxin. I mean, it's hard on them. And so I think that most of the time just quarantining and just observing and waiting for like a month is probably the best thing that you're going to do with some of the prevention.
Okay. And is there anything specific that you would be looking out for with hillstream loaches?
Ooh, gosh, I don't know. I love those things. I've actually never kept them. I'm curious, what have you guys seen as the diseases of hillstream loaches? I haven't heard of them getting anything specific.
No, neither have I. And this is, I've only had normal standard ones years ago. This will be the first time I've kind of got my hands on some wild caught ones. They've not been described yet either, so I don't know much about them.
Cool. That's exciting. Yeah. No, I would just hold something like that, and I wouldn't, I would just watch them.
I would be looking at, because we know they come from a little bit of a different environment than a lot of your other freshwater fish. I mean, it's in the name, right? And so that's something where I really feel, your strength as an aquarist in learning about their natural habitat, what water temperature they're from, what levels of, water flow and oxygenation they need, and, how dense you're keeping them. All of that stuff is going to serve those fish really well in, just building up their immune system, reducing stress, because they've already probably been through a lot, right? So how much can you, just reduce the stressors on them by providing the ideal environment?
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's the fun part, is setting up a new aquarium specifically for a single species.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, those are such cool fish, though. I'm gonna have to look at a picture after you do it, because I've always I go to the store and I look at them and I'm like, man, these are really neat.
Yeah, I know these ones I've never seen before. They've got like red on the tip of their dorsal fins as well, so that's what kind of caught my eye. So hopefully once they're set up and settled in, I'll be able to get some really nice videos and pictures and share with everybody.
Oh, good luck.
I know.
Cool. Right, so we've got another question from the floor, and just for the record, this is going completely off tangent to the questions that John had prepared. We're on our own little freeway, and we're just letting it cruise through. So, what we had scheduled here or planned. Brian would like to know what actually is neon tetra disease. I've read somewhere online that it is some sort of protozoa-like parasite. Do we have an insight on that?
Yes. So neon tetra disease is a microsporidium. Is it a parasite? Is it a fungus? These microsporidia, they're really interesting. They sort of it seems like every couple years they get reclassified. The current classification is that they're most closely related to fungi. But I always think of them as parasites. So, what are they? No one knows. It'll change like the next time someone does a bunch of DNA sequencing on something. But what neon tetra disease is it's this microsporidium that forms these oh gosh, my boss would kill me right now because I'm not going to use the correct these veterinary pathologists are so proud because they'll whip out the exact correct word for a specific life stage of a parasite, and then I'm sitting there and I'm like, oof, I forgot that after I read that.
You're looking at a textbook. You're on a live stream, so I can forgive you.
Yeah. So I'll have to. I'm not going to say anything so that it's not recorded as what I forgot. But they make a cyst, I'll call it. That's not what it is. That's full of these little microsporidia inside of it. And neon tetra disease is actually in the I think it's called a xenoma. It's in the muscle. And so, you see these neon tetras that get these white sort of lesions, and then they waste away. But what it is it's Plastophora, which is a microsporidium that makes xenomas in the muscle. And interesting thing about microsporidiums, they are very hard to treat. So kind of like a parallel is pseudoloma in zebrafish. This is a huge problem in zebrafish research colonies. They get pseudoloma, which is also a microsporidium that infects the brain and spinal cord. And they have put so much work, probably tens of thousands of dollars into some of these facilities, testing, culling, and trying to eliminate this parasite from these zebrafish colonies. And it's extremely hard to do because they're vertically transmitted. So essentially the thought is that they get transmitted in the egg. And so it's pretty hard if something is inside of the egg to deal with it. Mycobacterium, that's another great example of something that's vertically transmitted. And so, neon tetra disease is a rough one because there's really not a great way to treat it. And the microsporidium is pretty infectious, and the best thing you can do is be disinfecting stuff. And I think this is probably, I would have to double check. There's a really nice resource, I think from the Southern Regional Aquaculture Center, but it might be on Dr. Yanong's, the Florida Tropical Aquaculture Lab Extension publications. But it talks about the different UV dosages that will treat different fish pathogens. And I would guess that if you had UV filtration on your tank, it would help remove some of that from the water column. But I would have to double check that on the little table that I also haven't memorized.
Cool. All right, so we've definitely got some follow-up questions that have come through that little bit there. Just let me find them. Cool. So Mycobacterium, is UV sterilization in the water column effective at all? And is it possible to treat it in any system without a complete teardown and sterilization?
Jen
is a lot of talk on UV during this, so yes. We can,
Jen is the genius. She dealt with this. She knows what's up.
Yeah, I mean we wrote about this one because we know we should have a couple pieces on myco just because we know this one is scary for people because it's considered zoonotic and people are concerned that they could be infected. But yeah, so couple things. When I worked at the aquarium, mycobacterium was in the system. It was just there. There was no way we're going to get rid of that. And so when fish were extremely old or, low on the social hierarchy or had other issues going on, sometimes they would be infected with that. And sometimes a fish might die from, a seemingly unrelated cause. We'd send it out for necropsy and find it, oh yeah, and it also had myco. It's like, yep, it's just in there. There were some fish who did poorly. There's certain types of rainbow fish, for example, where they just couldn't cope with it. And so, there are some species differences with susceptibility. But, what we mentioned earlier about with a friend of ours who had fish that ended up having myco, and we didn't even realize that was the problem. Part of what was going on there was they were platies who basically, bred themselves into being overpopulated in her aquarium. So great success followed by some problems. And we were able to get a handle on it by using UV, one of these small internal UV filters. The idea that you could break down and sterilize your entire aquarium, get rid of myco, and then start fresh and not have myco, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work, and it's not worth really your time in doing that because you could do all that and you can go to the store and buy a perfectly healthy appearing fish of literally any species, and you could be bringing back myco again. Also, it's extremely hard to destroy it, with any of the disinfectants to get into every single nook and cranny. Not possible. So myco is really something to consider managing. And again, back to what can you do to keep the fish's immune system as strong as possible with all the environmental factors, the social factors, behavioral factors, nutritional, all of this stuff. And then minimizing the population of mycobacterium that your fish might encounter in the water column in their environment through hygiene and through UV can be pretty effective actually.
And it's also another thing to think about mycobacteria is that they can just be in the biofilm of your plumbing coming into your house, and they can just be in the water naturally. So it's not. It is absolutely not realistic to think, you could bleach the whole tank and the second you put more water in it, because the water coming out of your faucet isn't sterile. So you could just immediately put in more mycobacteria. So yeah, it's really hard because you see people asking questions about it. And, first of all, it's probably worth getting a definitive diagnosis on that if you can, just to be 100% sure that that's what it is. Because there are other things that could look like mycobacteria, that you might handle a little bit differently. For example, columnaris, which was what we thought these fish had. But once it's mycobacteria, it's probably not a good idea to nuke everything and do a full disinfection, because you may just end up back in the same place.
And I think we mentioned in our piece though too, it is possible if you've got fish who are heavily affected by it, they're very skinny or they've got a lot of outward signs. By that point, it might be difficult or impossible to recover that fish. And it's possible you might be in a position that you need to consider culling that fish or fishes, out of the population. So, and while correcting those other things and trying to minimize the resurgence of it and, just going through that management approach. So, because those fish are likely to be heavily to be shedding a lot of the bacteria into the environment, and therefore creating more of it for the other fish to be exposed to.
It's actually someone did this really cool paper, because one of the problems I had when I was working with salmon hatcheries was you'd go and there would be if they had some kind of disease going on and there's fish dying, and you'd look in and you're like, oh my God, you guys, you got to take out the sick fish. Please, just can you take out the dead fish, take out the sick fish. And if that means that someone has to stand there all day doing it, it's worth it. And someone did the best paper ever where he took a dead salmon that had died from bacterial cold water disease, which is caused by a bacteria that's related to columnaris. And he looked at how many bacteria that one dead fish released into the water and how many subsequent fish it could infect. And it was something like that one fish could like infect like 100 to 200 fish a day. And so I think that there's something, it's amazing. I mean, that's like the worst part of the whole thing is those sick fish. And so it's absolutely so important. Like if a fish is not doing well, take it out. And even if you end up having to treat your hospital tank and your main tank, at least it's not in there just like bombing the rest of your fish with, you know, pathogens. I'm actually remembering, because Jen was talking about how like when you work at a public aquarium and you're always like looking down in these tanks and you can't tell like what's in there. One time Scott sent me out front like with like a laser pointer because we were trying to take out this one salmon and we were trying to like laser point at it so the person behind the tank could like try to scoop out. It didn't work. But so, you know, hopefully like if they're sick, they're like easier to like catch and take out.
Sometimes they find a bit of energy though. I can tell you that. So, yeah.
But yeah, no, it's really it's totally worth removing sick fish. And we also have something in there about like humane euthanasia because, you know, this is actually, I think one of the hardest things about being a fish vet is a lot of the times by the time like people have called me about fish, they're really sick. Like it's just, they're beyond my ability to do anything. You know, I'm thinking about things like dropsy where they get like, you know, they're in like systemic organ failure. That's really not something that you're going to be able to like fix. And so we do have a resource about that as well. Cause that's kind of a sad, hard thing to do. And if you're going to, you know, have to cull fish, you want to do it in the most humane way possible. So we do also have a resource about that. But I think that as hard as it is to do, that's like a super underestimated thing to do when you have sick fish is just to get them out of where all the other fish are.
Right. Yep. Cool. I'm geeking out like the other 20 odd people that are watching right now. So fantastic. We've got a lot of follow-up questions running through this, so I'll try and order them correctly, hopefully. We'll start with this one. Do you think there has sometimes been a misunderstanding of biosecurity from the aquarium hobby, such as not using the same net for a tank if UV on a system is not replaced as well as it could be, etc.?
Yeah, biosecurity is so important. You know, it was really interesting with the salmon hatcheries. On the one hand, like you sort of would expect aquaculture to have like better biosecurity, but they were actually running river water through their system. So they would just pull water right off the river where there were all these dead salmon, you know, straight over the fish and whatever. So I wish I could say that I got to see like much better biosecurity on that side of stuff, but no. Definitely like disinfecting between tanks is important. Disinfecting nets, especially because the net is like touching the fish, and the fish is often what has so much, you know, if there's pathogens, they're probably mostly on the fish. You know, disinfection, just like as another high quality resource, the Southern Regional Aquaculture Center has, you know, extension publications with, it's really nice, the different types of disinfectants, including things like bleach, and the concentrations and lengths of time that you need and what they kill. This is great, right? Because like if you're really worried about mycobacteria, what do you actually have to do with your equipment between tanks, you know, to be able to kill it? So I think that that's huge. And then yes, one of the most misunderstood things about UV, so this is a great point, is that you have to not only like wipe biofilm off of the bulbs with some frequency, but then you also have to like replace them regularly as well, because otherwise they just don't work. And Jen can probably comment more on that.
Yeah, it's, you know, all those things are important. You know, it's great when it's brand new, you know, everything, you've got your fresh bucket of disinfectant and brand new UV bulb and you're feeling pretty good. And yeah, the months go by and maybe you don't have, you know, something that's sick. And if you don't have, you know, a proactive maintenance schedule in place, those things can lapse. And so, you know, in a big place, you know, like at the aquarium, we had, you know, a whole separate quarantine room, and there's, you know, very standard types of equipment that's used, you know, in any types of aquatic labs and so on. like a moist floor mat with disinfectant in it that you step on to disinfect your feet, because you don't want to be tracking things, between rooms, and then a net falls on the floor, and then, so there was a disinfectant that we commonly use called Virkon that was sort of well known for being used in those applications. So one of the things, though, look, John asked earlier, like, how do you balance all the things you need to do in a day, in a public aquarium? It's like, yeah, maybe somebody was really busy with all the quarantine fish, and maybe they got called up, for some issue with an exhibit, and they didn't change, the disinfectant bath. Oh, one more day or whatever. Like, you've got to have a schedule in place to deal with that stuff, because that's the type of stuff that, when you start getting busy and you're sort of putting out proverbial fires all the time, and just reacting to different things that happen, which is all the time, if you own a big, fish store, or import or export, or an aquarium, you're dealing with that stuff. So yeah, you've got to use an effective disinfectant. You've got to keep it refreshed. And as Nora said, like, the UV disinfection is only as good as the flow rate, and understanding that what you're targeting, the maintenance of the sleeve and the maintenance of the bulb. So a lot of the small units that are available to hobbyists these days, at least the one that I use, there's a light, an indicator light for hours of runtime. And so that'll let me know when, like, the manufacturer has sort of deemed that, hey, you need to replace this bulb. So most units will come with some guidelines that way, or some sort of indicator light to help you with that.
You just reminded me of something I'll mention, because I think bleach is probably going to be like the most inexpensive, easiest thing for people to get. If you are like disinfecting your stuff, in between tanks. And then again, you can also just decide that your house is one biosecure unit and just do that, which is where I'm at. But bleach needs to be like regularly changed. It's good for like maybe like a month, and it should be protected from light, and it needs to be like covered when when you're mixing it into solution too, because it's basically like chlorine gas, so it comes off. So that's another really important thing if you're doing that. And this is all covered in that resource I mentioned, because it's absolutely right. One of the hardest things about biosecurity is, like, you think you're doing it, but then, like, you end up finding out later, like, oh shoot, I wasn't replacing my bleach every month. Like, it probably wasn't good,
Yeah.
All right. So this is a double from Rebecca. Actually, going to ask them in a different order because it makes more sense this way. Do you think that wasting away could be a behavioral response to pain, and which is prefaced to because it is in the muscle, reduces the movement in them, or creates pain, so reluctant to move to put the pressure on it?
Yeah, this is probably related to neon tetra disease, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it was about
so yeah, this is really interesting actually. When I was in vet school, I went to Aquavet. I'm really curious what Jen has to say about this, because like one of the we spent a whole afternoon debating like whether fish feel pain or not, and we actually read scientific papers kind of on both sides of the issue, because like some people argue that like their brains don't have the proper processing centers to be able to like perceive pain, but there's other studies that suggest that maybe they do. And I sort of feel it doesn't really matter, because like I think we just should assume that they can experience pain, and at the very least like distress when certain things happen to them. But yeah, so one of the studies I thought was really interesting was they took, I think it was salmon, and they actually injected bee venom into the snouts of some of them, and then the control group, I think they just injected like saline. And the ones that they put the bee venom in, like they kept like trying to like rub their nose, right? Because like I'm sure it was not comfortable. So yeah, I absolutely think that when fish get certain either like injuries, and yes, with certain diseases, they probably can get pain, or at least experience some level of discomfort, such that yeah, they're not feeling well, they're not going to eat, whatever. I don't know for microsporidian infections in general, and actually now I'm kind of curious. Mammals get certain infections, and I don't know whether they're like associated with a lot of pain, but that would be something interesting to follow up on. But even not with like neon tetra disease, but other stuff, I would think like some of the, like when you look at the fish afterwards and you see like the lesions and what was happening to it, yeah, I would think that can be a big contributor to why they kind of decline.
Right. So Brian has said, This has been one of the most informative streams yet. Thank you so much for sharing the knowledge. I would second that. And everybody so far is thinking the same way. And
thank
following
you.
up from that, John has put a link to your website scrolling down below. And we've had multiple people say it is a great website and that they have bookmarked your website now. So, yeah, so far this has been phenomenal. And I know everyone's mind's going, wow! So, good, awesome.
Thanks. Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Right. That one right out. What are your thoughts on scaleless versus not in the hobby for treatment, given loaches are seen as scaleless, even if they have scales, loricoids, I don't even know that word, or have dermal plating, etc.?
Oh, this is a tough one. Okay, so Jen, you gotta go. I'm just gonna say, I'll make one comment. So like I did a little dive on this. Like I went into the Noga fish disease book because I was curious because I remember like when I was a kid, and speaking of like the old fish pathology textbooks, like you'd go in them, or like you'd look in one of the other hobby books and they'd have like their little fish disease chapter, and there's always this thing about how scaleless fish do not handle like certain treatments well. And so I went looking, and I looked in Noga fish disease, and they sort of talk about how like some scaleless fish, and again, what is a scaleless fish, don't handle, and the specific thing in Noga was malachite green, and that they don't handle that well. But I completely agree with you. It's really interesting because like they all sort of have like different skin systems, and so I don't know how much evidence there is for any of that. And now I would like to hear Jen's experience on this, because I really struggle to like define like a truly, scaleless fish, and then to find any level of like corresponding research into that. Wouldn't that be a great research project if people had like a bunch of money to fund it? But yeah.
Oh yeah, no, I agree with you on that, Nora. Yeah, that it's always been a challenge for me because, as I mentioned, like working with the big systems in the past, I frequently found myself in the position where I had to do a treatment, again, referring to salt because I use that all the time, on the system, regardless if there were some so-called scaleless fish in there or knife fish or whatever. It's like, look, I've got a problem in the system. I have to do this and I can't catch all those fish out. So here we go. And I never ran into issues with salt. But again, it is such like a piece in the hobbyist literature that you hear about, like, being careful with scaleless fish, with this or that. So yeah, I'd have to like defer and like find some other resources on that. And that should maybe be a good one that we dive into in the future, Nora, because
it would be.
I don't have a really clear answer on that. Like I just, if I've seen fish die from treatments, generally it's been because whatever was affecting them was sort of too far along. Had a few weird ones over the years. I struggle to remember the exact situation, but a certain species of saltwater fish, perhaps it was a certain type of anthias that we had in quarantine that reacted extremely poorly to a medication. Maybe that was metronidazole, but again, it's been many, many years, so I might not be remembering correctly. So once in a while you see something like that, and I couldn't tell you exactly why that happened, but obviously the fish would have been like stressed and sick in the first place to be in that scenario.
And I think maybe just because this is interesting for people, so the way that fish's skin like works in general, and this is like obviously like sharks are like their own separate thing, right? Because they have like dermal denticles, but you have different kinds of scales, but on the external part of the fish, you have this like mucus layer, and then you have an epidermis, which is like your skin. And then under that is where the scales are, and the scales are actually bone. So this is kind of interesting because I didn't get in trouble, but I sort of got in trouble at work because we receive samples from people that are like fixed tissues that then we'll take and put onto microscope slides, and that's like what my boss and other veterinary pathologists are evaluating under a microscope, to look at like changes in the fish's tissues and see if they have any diseases. But I was was trying to get like it was from like a carp, and I was trying to get the section of skin to go right on the slide, but they have these huge scales. I mean, they're massive. I think they're like cycloid scales. And I'm like taking my little like razor blade trying to cut through. It doesn't cut through. It's bone. It was a disaster. And they're like, Nora, don't do this. And you actually need to decalcify it to get it, in the section to make it soft so that you can cut through it. And but this is really interesting because when you look at it under the microscope, there's actually a layer, and that's why like the scales are colored, is because there's a layer of skin that includes the color cells over, the scale. And so it is interesting because of course scaleless fish still have skin, and so the outside of the fish is almost the same. And so I am interested. I almost wonder if it's like a species susceptibility poor reaction thing as opposed to like, something about them not having scales. But I mean, who knows? I have no idea. So I don't know how. It's a great question.
Cool. Just quickly, do you guys have a YouTube channel by any chance?
No.
Not yet.
Yeah.
We want to do a podcast, but we're working up to it.
You should probably do everything and get all this information out to everybody. Do you think, or how do you think the public perception of fish keeping has changed over the last, say, 10 or so years?
What I've seen, I think that it changes a lot based on the area actually that you're living in. So here in Vancouver, because real estate is very expensive and people, not everybody is able to own a place. People are often renting and having to move. I think that's one of the reasons why the nano tanks, the nano planted tanks, are extremely popular here. And of course, as you go, and you even see it with like our fish stores that are here, some of our main stores like here in the sort of Vancouver core, very focused on smaller species. You're not really going and seeing big, Malawi cichlids or whatever, or big Oscars and things like that down at like the downtown fish store. But if you head out, to the suburbs, you drive an hour out of town, they've got more space, and there are, people have room to have bigger species. Also depends, of course, on the water that's coming out of the tap. And so I do extremely well. Like I'm breeding wild bettas with water that's pretty well out of the tap and a few almond leaves added in, and away you go. Whereas, if I lived, back where I was in Ontario, couldn't have done that. It was liquid rock. So I did well with Mbuna. And so, it really just depends on where you are. But I do see in general a move away from like breeding as much and more into the biotopes and into the aquascaping. And I think if you're keeping your fish well, oftentimes they just breed for you. Like I'm kind of overrun with wild bettas at the moment. Send me a message if you are in Canada and you're interested in some bettas. I mean, it's like, okay, guys, like you can slow down. Like I got to get some more tanks. I got to get some more room for you. So yeah, changed it a little bit that way. I'd say it's what I've noticed.
I think that's true. I think of so actually it was like, oh man, I don't know when it was. It would have been a while ago. But Mike Helweg and Ted Judy did like a breed off in it was like TFH or one of the magazines. And I just remember like I was reading it, and then I found out like Ted Judy lived in Madison, Wisconsin, which was where I was from. And then one of the fish stores I was buying fish from was they're getting all these weird cichlids because that was what Ted Judy.
Yeah.
But I think you're totally right. Like I think a lot about how like, and like when you read the kind of like the classic like old aquarium guides, like Axelrod stuff or like the Innis, but like whatever, it really is all about like how to breed these fish, and like it is very much more like now you look in and I mean these beautiful tanks. I can't do it. My tanks are so ugly, but I think that like people are very into that.
Cool. So before, I think John's got a question. Before we get into that, there's just been a significant influx of people encouraging you strongly to start a podcast. A podcast would be amazing. I would watch that. I would listen to that. A science-based fishy podcast, please. There's so few of them, so I think you should probably do that. That would be fantastic for the
This
people.
is like our little practice to kind of get us energized.
Yeah. We appreciate the encouragement.
Well, take it as a sign.
That's been received very, very well. We can put it that way.
Well,
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask, obviously you have both worked within the industry for a few years now. Like you are both hobbyists originally, so you've got a unique perspective. But over the years, has there been like myths that you've debunked, or things that maybe hobbyists that have not entered into the industry side of the fish keeping world would still believe as true, but having your experience from the science community, you can now say that that's not true. Is there anything that you would obviously take this chance now to be debunked?
Well,
Jen, go.
generally, yeah, I'm sure we both have a lot to say about that. I would just say one of the things that I love about fish keeping, and one of the things that continuously energizes me and just gives me like that, magical feeling that anybody who keeps fish knows, is being surprised by fish. After all this time, after decades, after working with, hundreds or thousands of species of fish, at the aquarium or on my own in different settings, fish still surprise me. I'm always sending messages to Nora about what's happening with the wild bettas, and I didn't know they were going to do this, and why do they do this? What's happening? And the fact that I can still be amazed by their behavior, by what they do, how they react to things. That's incredible. And so I think anytime I keep a species, you can go look online and get, this basic information about it, but prepare to be surprised. Keep notes, document what's happening with your fish. There was one species, recently that I have been working with, the betta mandor, and everything says, oh yeah, they usually mouth brood for about 14, 15 days. That's it. Well, my guy held on to his for 23 days.
Wow.
And they were tiny fry when they came out. So, and I'm recording all my, temperature and pH and all that, but it's I was kind of expecting, okay, where's the babies? Are they fry coming out? I don't get it. And it's 23 days. Okay, that wasn't what I expected. So I think we can still learn so much. Anybody that's keeping a species, especially something that's a little less commonly kept, we all have a chance to contribute to the knowledge of them. And especially as different fish become more threatened in their natural habitats, wild bettas as an example of that, or, licorice gouramis or other types of fish that have very small restricted ranges, are definitely, in danger. And freshwater fish in general have really restricted ranges, and there's such a high amount of diversity in these species. So, keep your fish, take notes, prepare to be surprised, and just don't take everything that you see, for face value, I think.
Yeah, I think one thing I was thinking about is, when I was a kid, and I would go and read about something like I had an Oscar and it got hole in the head, so I went and read up about that, and it's, there's a lot of stuff about how it's hexamida and you treat it with metronidazole, and then to sort of, in vet school, you have to learn about, you take a parasitology course, you take a pathology course, you take, pharmacology, and then to kind of learn all this stuff and then look back and be okay, hole in the head is not caused by, hexamida. I don't know why they get it, but I know that it's not hexamida. And so to sort of realize how much more you know, but then like Jen said, how much more you don't know, and how, and it's, it kind of makes me sad because in salmonids, when I was on the aquaculture side of stuff, there was a little bit more research and evidence that you could draw from to be okay, people have published hundreds of papers about bacterial cold water disease. I have a pretty good idea of what causes it, what it does to the fish, and how to manage it. Now, getting people to do that was the whole hard part of it. But, you understood the basic disease process. But with our tropical fish, being kept in home aquaria, a lot of those species, no one probably has written a single thing about certain diseases in them. And so there's just a ton that's left to learn about it. And I think that it's the more you know that you don't know. And I really feel that about some of this stuff. And I think another kind of cool one that I'm just thinking about is so Jen and I got really into fancy bettas during COVID.
This has started, and now I'm on the wild bettas, but that's what got me back on the labyrinth fish train.
And I really liked those the black and white ones with the samurai masks. But of course, those were the ones that get the diamond eye. And we were really interested, what is diamond eye? Well, little did we know, one of my colleagues had actually submitted those fish, and a betta fish that had the diamond eye condition. And my current boss had been looking at it, and they published a paper about it. And so that was really cool to be like, oh wow, like someone actually took the time to figure this out. And it's incredible because there was like thousands of like forum posts about diamond eye, but I don't think anybody had actually gone and like, looked at it to be like, this is what it is. And so, and it wasn't hard to like, do it. But just that like how little is sometimes being done with some of this. So that's something that, that I think about a lot. I would like to know more.
Yeah. And this is, it's one of the challenges that we have, with our site and with our blog and like with providing information is exactly what Nora said. It's sort of like the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And so, we're not the ones on there, that are saying, oh yeah, your fish definitely has ick. We might look at it and we might say, yeah, it probably is, but we don't have the context. We're not there skin scraping it, looking under a microscope. And between, Nora's experience and mine, like we know you can't always be sure. And yet, of course, sometimes people are looking for an answer. That's what people want. They want a direct advice and answer. It's this, do that. Right. And so we struggle with trying to like provide that level of direct advice because we don't think it like necessarily serves people because it's not always true. And so we're really, just trying to, again, like help people learn how to approach the problems, how to think about them and provide those resources so they can do the best they can. But yeah, it's difficult out there because it's hard to, separate the wheat from the chaff. And there's a lot of people that have, a lot of experience over the years. And maybe they've had some good results with using a certain med and they feel really sure about it. So I think it's just really tough for people to find answers. And that, again, is why we do what we do with our site.
Cool. Well, that actually segues us really well into your website. So Fish Keep and Chill. First of all, where did that name came from? Because it's awesome. And then what is your purpose and your desires and everything that you're doing on your website?
Yeah, Nora, where did the name come from?
I don't know.
I feel like that was like your yeah. It's a big brainstorm, but ultimately, like we went back to, okay, what's the feeling? Like really it was about who are we? What is it like when Nora and I are chatting and talking and doing fish stuff and like on the phone on Saturdays, making our next post and, we're scientific, but we're also just having fun, at least like for our hobby side of things. I won't speak to Nora's job because I don't know what goes on there, but yeah, like, so it's about the enjoyment of it and that balance, sort of like that art and science of fish keeping thing that, we always refer to. It's that balance between, having fun and enjoying and relaxing your fish and getting the most you can out of the hobby. It's just a wonderful hobby. Yeah. And having the resources you need to do it well and follow your curiosity.
Cause I think like that's another part of it is it should be like easy. I mean, maybe that's not the right word, but it's like it's not that hard to get a fish tank up and keep it going. Like it should be pretty straightforward and easy. And if it's not, like I just think people have been like given some bad advice or not, properly, told what to do. And I think our point of the website was like we would see people saying things that were not only wrong, but I think were also like actually causing harm to people's fish tanks, people's ability to succeed. And so, the goal with the website is like, what does the evidence say? Like we have, quite a bit of experience and education, as well as just, having our experiences with our own fish tanks. And so like, how can we just get people like high quality information that they can trust, that's from experts who also really like keeping fish, as hobbyists.
They say that one of the main reason that people leave the hobby is from bad advice. And I'm sure, as, with retail experience and with customers, like you want them to succeed. But, it's a common story. Nora, you had a statistic at one point where it's like there's a certain amount of like after 1 year or something, vast majority of new tanks, it was something like that.
I can't remember it, but yeah, it was something like a huge number of people like who buy a new fish tank at the fish store. This was like an industry study in the US. Yeah. Like a year later, I think it's like less than half of them like still have the fish tank going. I mean, it's like, it's not good.
Yeah, it's not good. And we've gotten so much from the hobby. Like, it has sustained me, you know, for my whole life with like constant interest, curiosity. It's brought me on incredible adventures, you know, scuba diving in Lake Tanganyika to research cichlids, going, you know, to Brazil and doing the Piaba trips, meeting Nora, meeting some of these other amazing people, meeting you guys. I mean, it's like, it has given me so much. And so, you know, if I, as a kid, like if I hadn't had those like very specific things that I kind of mentioned in the beginning that really helped carry me along and encourage me, if I had just had, you know, a bad, well, I did have some bad experiences to be fair, but those other things helped carry me along. If I had just had a bad, you know, experience out the gate, I might not have ended up, although I can't picture myself without fish, so I don't even know if it's possible, but you know, I might not have ended up, you know, where I am with it. We're having all these amazing experiences. And the fish need us. I mean, people need to keep fish. We need to be connected with nature. We need to think about other parts of the world, you know, where these fish come from, what's going on, you know? And so in this day and age, like where, look, we're spending a lot of time on screens, and I'm really glad all the viewers are spending their time on the screen right now. But other than that, you know, I'm trying to get my little niece and nephew, last time I was back home there, set up an aquarium for them. You know, it's something, I think it's just so important for so many people to have that connection with nature that you can get from a home aquarium.
Absolutely.
You know, my daughter has asked me countless times to get an axolotl, and I'm pretty anti-axolotl. Because I went around dealing with it.
She's got two right there.
I got on it. Well, because I was on Axolotl Reddit, which is a fascinating place, and there's a lot. Wait, I almost think there's more like strong opinions about axolotl keeping than there is even in fish keeping. But you know, they're not that bad. They're the easiest things I've ever kept in a tank. They're just incredibly boring. So your daughter will probably be very disappointed with the fact that like they don't do anything.
That's kind of why I said no, but you guys, you've just both inspired me to go. Next time she asks and say yes, we're going to do it.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Could be. I don't want to deal with it, but I'm going to deal with it. But it might just harbor that interest somewhere for the rest of her life. I was hoping she would get to some sort of a cool fish like a, I don't know, a pleco or a corridor, but no, it seems like axolotl's her thing. So we'll roll with that.
Well, I thought that, but I've ended up having geckos. So I'm still working on that. It's an aquarium, but it's got a gecko in it, not fish.
Yeah.
You'll like slowly transition.
Yeah.
So you've given us a little bit of an insight to your website. What are some of the reasons that people should visit it, and what are they going to find there when they get to your website?
Well, I think,
Jen, what are our top articles?
Yeah, well, the top, I mean, it was just, so what we write about, honestly, are the things that interest us. Like, yes, we're trying to address things that people need help with. And, you know, if viewers here today have suggestions of topics they'd love for us to cover, please like email those into the site, or, you know, you guys are message us on Facebook. We've got the page there. Always looking for ideas, but we're following our curiosity, really. And so, you know, the core of our site is our conversations. And so Nora and I write these together, and it's like us discussing these topics. So, you know, kind of podcast style, but just the way that we write it up together, so we can make sure we've referenced everything properly. So that's the main thing. You're gonna, you know, get, you know, articles written by both of us or one of us on our area of expertise. Nora has done a series of Fish Health Explained, so addressing topics like diamond beta, like hole in the head disease, you know, these different things. One of the ones people seem to find us from a lot is the ick versus epistylis. And that was the first one I said, hey, look, let's talk about this, because we were already having a conversation about it, like feeling bad for people being so confused and, in our opinion, oftentimes being misled. So we just wanted to, again, like present that balanced view of what we do know and what you can't know and why, and how you could approach this. So yeah, we've got fish health in there, but also some husbandry stuff, also some fun stuff, you know, live food cultures, and really, again, like following our interests, whatever like we're chatting about at the time, and then just trying to make sure it's useful for people.
And then we had like another one that it's always interesting to me. I guess I'm like surprised sometimes by what like people are interested in reading about, because we had the white bumps and patches on betta fish that we did with Dr. Jessie Sanders, who's
Mhm.
she mostly does koi in California, but who knows that like the number two thing she gets called about is betta fish. And that was really interesting. I actually learned a lot from that one, so that was kind of neat. But I think like we really, and that's why like we're so interested in hearing from people is like what are the things that like, you know, as a hobbyist you feel like you need information on, because that's what like we want stuff to be useful as well, and something that
Mm.
people can like refer to, and hopefully kind of at multiple levels, because sometimes you know, it's hard because like if it's like a super technical topic, you know, like you can only simplify something so much before you sort of lose the, you know, the core concept. But at the same point, like sometimes you can, you know, there's something like very straightforward and you can just complicate it like beyond all, you know, um, just reasonability. And so like kind of trying to have something there so that if you're a beginner, you're going to get set on the right track, but also for people who are more experienced, you don't have dealt with stuff, they can still get something, you know, from some of the articles and the conversations that we've done, you know, as well. That's like really important.
Yeah, Nora uses, you know, of course, like being a veterinarian, like she does use technical terminology. And so sometimes there isn't, you know, like an exact layperson translation. And so on some of our pieces, we try to do like a glossary, like, hey, we're using these terms.
Cool.
Here's why, here's what they
Cool.
mean. To help people advance, you know, along their understanding and just develop like their literacy with all of those things too, because that's going to help them learn and separate the good resources from the bad and develop their understanding.
As a general consumer of aquatic websites, we'll put it that way, I suppose, I struggle sometimes with big technical words, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. And like if too many of them come through, you go, I'm not getting what I need from this because it's too hard to read. So simplifying it is fantastic. But as you mentioned, you can't simplify it too much sometimes because it gets lost. To have a glossary in there is a fantastic option. You know, okay, what is this? There it is. Cool. Learning, fantastic. And you can just continue to flow through it. So that's a fantastic idea.
And it's hard too sometimes, like it's actually like really interesting, like as like I remember like when I was in vet school and I went a lot, I had to go on like some dairy ambulatory rotations, and God, they'd be saying stuff and I'd like go back at the end of the day and Google it, and I could not, I mean, I just couldn't find it. Like I don't know if I wasn't, you know, like sometimes it's words like you're like, I don't even know how to spell this. You know, so you're like you're not going to get the good Google result, or it's like a term that just doesn't come back. And I had a professor that said that because it's interesting, you know, she basically said that she'll put more technical words in a like a report that she'll write like after someone's pet comes to the vet, and figure that, you know, in the age of the internet, it's much easier to you know, to look stuff up, but it's also like sometimes stuff is still like really niche and hard to find. So yeah, that is something that we spend a lot of time like working on, is to try to get like the right level of accessibility, but also like, you know, the point is that we are technical experts, so like we want to have it be, you know, a little bit more than you know, like something super basic.
Yeah.
Cool. And just so the powers that be that are listening above us can find you, where is your website? Where are people looking to find that?
So the website is fishkeepandchill.com, and we have basically two types of content that we're doing right now. We have articles, which are more like how to, or like do's don'ts about, you know, basic stuff. So we have like a do's and don'ts of mycobacteria, how to quarantine. Jen wrote an awesome article, bettas for beginners, you know, stuff like that. That's like an article topic. And then sort of as like a deeper, more in-depth part of stuff, we have our conversations. And those are back and forth, you know, conversations between Jen and I that get a little bit deeper into like, you know, here's an article like this is how you set up your quarantine tank and basically do it. And then we have a conversation that's all about like, okay, here's kind of the ins and outs of quarantine, and all of that is at fishkeepandchill.com.
Yeah, and our experiences with it too, you know, so we just kind of throw that into it, so it's not just like, you know, and we really think like, obviously in the age now with AI and, you know, chat GPT, like all this stuff, like just factual information although obviously a lot of those can be quite wrong. We all know that. I actually think that there is going to be more of a demand for and more of a desire for real people talking about real things and real experience. And that's really, what we're doing primarily, again, with those other pieces as well, just to provide people some good resources to get them going.
Cool. And so that website is fishkeepandchill.com?
You got it.
Wait, hopefully things picked it up and people start going to it and all that kind of good stuff.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Cool.
We would love that.
So we're coming to the end of our time together. Rebecca's got a couple of comments there that I'm hoping we can try and get through, and we'll leave it at that after that. So did you manage to see the undergraduate thesis on beta marbling? From memory, without reading it again, it was related to transposons rather than a word that starts with V.
No, I haven't seen that. Jen, have you seen that? Because Jen got into you got into the genetics of coloring.
I did. I don't know that I've seen that one, so that'd be an interesting one to look at. Yeah, since I've exclusively focused now on the wild betas, I am not looking up that type of stuff as much. But I'm glad people are working on it. I mean, the koi plakat betas are absolutely beautiful. I mean, and that marbling does change. The real common post that we see on the beta forums is sort of the 6-month glow up. Here's what he looked like when I got him, and now look, he's completely different. He's all dark and he's changed. So that coloration changes a lot, which is definitely interesting.
That's so interesting about the transposons. That was my undergrad stuff was with molecular biology. So I'll have to read that. I think Rebecca's on her Facebook, right? So we'll be able to. Yeah.
And I think this is a follow-up or a very similar thing. Spines versus bristles for loricides, hence tentacles help for defining fleshy growths and ancestris and lacinistrous tentacles. I love when you use big words, Rebecca. Thank you.
Interesting. I'm not sure what that one relates to. I can't think back to what we were talking about. Jen?
Not totally sure on that one. Is that more of a morphology thing? I think, Rebecca's got a lot of experience with loricarid morphology, I think, and jaws. So she's probably the one I would go to ask about that. Yeah.
All right, cool. So that brings us to the end of our structured stuff. So we like to see them talk nerdy to me. I love it. That brings us to what we call the School of Six, which is 6 very short answer questions. They're not meant to put you on the spot, but every now and then they sometimes do. So my first question is, doing a coin toss, heads or tails?
Heads.
Yeah, I was going to say heads too. I don't know why.
Are you tea or coffee drinkers?
Oh, coffee.
Monster Energy.
Are we alone in the universe?
No.
Cool. If you could have a meal with anybody alive or dead from any point in time, fictional or real, who would that be?
I'm not going to say it, but I know.
You know?
I know who I would, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, you can say yours. I don't know who mine is.
Charles Darwin.
Oh, that's a good one. Can I join you for dinner with Darwin? That'd be great.
Yeah, you could come with us. Yeah, I would allow you to join us.
One of my friends, dearly departed friend, Greg Bull, he was a Darwin impersonator, and he is honored at our local biodiversity museum for his amazing impersonation. Full, facial hair to the max, that they custom cane, the whole outfit, incredible. Anyway.
So you've already had that experience.
I kind of have, yeah. I would do it again.
Paper, scissors, rocks. What's your first call?
Rock.
Oh, I was going to say scissors.
Oh, I would beat you.
I use scissors all the time. You can't go wrong with that, right? Well, you can, because you just beat me.
Rocks. What is your unicorn fish to either keep, see in the wild, take photos of, study, anything along those lines?
For me, I would like to keep and breed wild discus again. That is a bucket list thing for me. I have them at the aquarium, but don't anymore. But they're incredible.
Cool.
I actually just so I just got, okay, God, they're not Corydoras anymore. Hoplosoma David Sanzi, So we had them at New England Aquarium when I was volunteering there in the anaconda tank, and I just loved them. I thought they were so cool. And after I left, I was like always looking for them for like 10 years. I was looking and looking and looking, and actually I just finally got them. So they're here. I have some eggs that they have laid. Super exciting, but I would also really like to see them in the wild. And it's just like the nostalgia of that was like, oh man, it just makes me think of Scott and the freshwater gallery, and like it's just a good feeling.
Right now, I do want to go jump into a Borneo swamp. Leeches be damned, because I'm so into like the peat swamp ecosystems and fish right now. So that may happen. We'll see.
And my absolute last question for you, which makes 7, but we'll just ignore that, is where can people find you if they want to get either in contact with you individually or via your website or your socials? Where can people get more of what you're giving off to everybody right now?
Yeah, so at the moment, obviously we've got the website. There is a contact form on there that'll email us, so we'll get that. And we've got just our Facebook page there, Fish Keep and Chill on Facebook. I think we're connected on there with the Fish Room. And so, we're posting our pieces on there as we're publishing them. And we're participating in some of the groups there too, sort of answering some questions when we can and just seeing, what people are chatting about and what they might find helpful. So those are sort of the 2 main places that you could get in touch with us.
Yep.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you very much for both your time. This has been absolutely wild. It's been a heck of a ride, and I've enjoyed every single second of it. It's been absolutely fantastic. And I know the people that were in the chat have gotten a lot out of this. So thank you very much. I would also like to strongly encourage you to start a podcast or a video podcast or something along that lines. You've got so much to give out to the world, and there'll be a lot of people that are really interested in what you have to say. So yeah.
That is so nice to hear. That makes us feel really good because we just want to help people.
We do.
Well, you do what you're doing, and it'll be a great success for sure.
Yeah, 100% get all that information out there because this has been absolutely brilliant. So thank you very much.
We really appreciate the invite. It was just awesome that you reached out to us. So thank you so much for hosting us.
Awesome.
Well, it's been a pleasure.
I hope you have a lovely afternoon and evening or wherever you happen to be in the world right now. Have a good one, team. Happy fish keeping and catch you all later.
Thank you.
Have a good one. Bye.